Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The realtor never told me about David Foster until after I signed the lease. I only learned about him when Mrs. Chen from next door brought it up while I was unloading my moving truck. "You know what happened to the last tenant, right?" she asked, watching me struggle with a heavy box. When I shook my head, she told me how Foster had run screaming from the house one night 6 months ago, wearing only his underwear. He ended up in Spring Grove Hospital's psychiatric ward, babbling about curses and footsteps in the upstairs hallway. I laughed it off. The Row House was a steal for Baltimore. $200 a month for a restored 1890s Victorian with original hardwood floors and crown molding. Sure, it needed some work. The radiators clanked, some floorboards creaked, and the shared wall with Unit 42B transmitted sound too easily. But after my divorce, I couldn't be picky. I needed an affordable place close to my new job at Johns Hopkins, and 42A Sycamore Street fit the bill. The first week passed without incident. I settled into a routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., shower, coffee, commute downtown to the hospital where I worked as a radiologist. Come home, microwave dinner, watch Netflix, sleep. The house's quirks became familiar. The way the front door stuck slightly, the loose step on the stairs, the faint smell of old wood and plaster. The neighboring unit stayed empty. Then came the footsteps. I first heard them on a Tuesday night in October around 2 a.m. The sound yanked me from sleep, heavy thuds moving across the second-floor hallway right above my bedroom. They were slow, deliberate steps like someone wearing work boots. Thud. Pause. Thud. Pause. The ancient floorboards groaned under each impact. My first thought was burglars. I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat I kept under the bed, heart pounding as I crept up the stairs. The second floor was pitch black except for streetlight filtering through the windows. I checked every room, the empty spare bedroom, the bathroom, the small office I'd set up. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no open windows. The footsteps had stopped. I told myself it was just the house settling. These old places made weird noises. Everyone knew that. But the next night, same time, the footsteps returned. This time they paced back and forth for nearly an hour. I lay rigid in bed, bat clutched to my chest, listening to the slow, methodical thuds traverse the hallway above me. After the third night, I called my landlord. "Look, the place is over 100 years old," he said. "Pipes expand and contract. Wooden beams shift. It's normal." "This isn't the building settling," I insisted. "These are footsteps, heavy ones." He sighed. "Mr. Walker, I assure you the second floor is structurally sound. We had it inspected before you moved in. If you're really concerned, I can send someone to check it out next week." But I couldn't wait that long. The footsteps came every night now, always around 2 a.m., always with the same slow, heavy rhythm. I started sleeping with every light in the house on. I installed a security system. I even called the police one night, but by the time they arrived, the sounds had stopped. They found nothing suspicious. The lack of sleep started affecting my work. I dozed off while reviewing chest x-rays, mixed up patient files. My supervisor noticed and suggested I take some time off. Instead, I grew obsessed with researching the house's history. The Baltimore County Records Office had documents dating back to its construction in 1891. Nothing remarkable stood out, just a series of owners and tenants over the decades. No deaths were recorded at the address, no violent crimes. The most recent entry showed David Foster's rental agreement from January to April of the previous year. I tracked Foster down at Spring Grove Hospital. Getting in to see him wasn't easy. I had to pretend to be a relative. When they finally brought him to the visiting room, I barely recognized him from the driver's license photo in his rental application. His hair had gone completely gray. Deep lines creased his face. His hands trembled constantly. "The footsteps," he said as soon as I sat down. "You're hearing them too, aren't you? always at 2 a.m. I leaned forward. What are they? What's causing them? Foster's eyes darted around the room. It's not what, it's who. The original owner. Harrison Blake. He built both houses, lived in 42A. Died there too in 1916. Fell down the stairs and broke his neck. He grabbed my arm, but he never left. He's still there, pacing, always pacing, looking for something. There's no record of anyone dying in the house, I said, because they covered it up. His family didn't want scandal, but I found letters, old newspapers. Blake was obsessed with the occult, conducted rituals in the basement, tried to contact the dead. Foster's voice dropped to a whisper. He succeeded too well. Opened a door he couldn't close. That's why the footsteps never stop. That's why they get louder, closer, until a nurse appeared. Time's up, Mr. Foster. As they led him away, he shouted back at me. Check the basement, behind the coal chute. The truth is there. I spent that afternoon in the basement with a flashlight. The old coal chute was still there, sealed up decades ago when the house converted to gas heat. Behind it I found a loose brick. Inside the cavity was a metal box, badly rusted. It contained a leather-bound journal, the pages yellow and brittle. The handwriting was cramped but legible, Harrison Blake's personal diary. Most entries were mundane business records, but they grew increasingly erratic in the months before his death. He wrote about experiments with seances and spirit boards, about voices in the walls, about footsteps that followed him through the house. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1916. It's here. God help me. It's here. I can hear it coming up the stairs. The ritual worked, but I was wrong about everything. So wrong. It's not a door to the other side. It's a door to something else. Something that was never meant to. The entry ended mid-sentence. That night, the footsteps started earlier, 1 a.m., and they were different, faster, more purposeful. They moved from the hallway into the spare bedroom directly above me. There was a scratching sound like nails dragging across hardwood. Then silence. I lay in bed, every muscle tense, listening. The digital clock on my nightstand clicked over to 1:59 a.m. A floorboard creaked at the top of the stairs. Another creak, halfway down. Another. 3 steps from the bottom. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in white clouds. The final step groaned. Heavy footsteps crossed my bedroom floor, slow and deliberate. The mattress compressed on one side like someone sitting down. I felt hot breath on my face. I ran. I didn't stop to grab anything. Not my phone, not my wallet, not even shoes. I sprinted out the front door in my boxers and t-shirt, bare feet slapping the sidewalk as I ran through the dark streets. Behind me, a deep laugh echoed from the house's open doorway. They found me 3 blocks away, huddled in a corner store doorway, shivering and babbling. The police report noted signs of extreme psychological distress, but no evidence of an intruder or break-in at 42A Sycamore Street. The hospital admitted me for observation. Acute stress reaction, they said. Possible psychotic break. I checked myself out after 2 days, against medical advice. I never went back to the house. Left everything there. Furniture, clothes, family photos. The landlord kept my security deposit and first month's rent. I didn't care. I'm staying with my sister in Philadelphia now. Looking for a new job, a new place to live. Somewhere modern. No history, no basements. But sometimes late at night I still hear them. Heavy footsteps moving slowly across a distant floor. And I wonder about 42A Sycamore Street. About what Harrison Blake really found with his rituals. About the door he opened. The house is for rent again. $200 a month. A steal for Baltimore. The footsteps are waiting for the next tenant. I shouldn't have gone to check on those sounds. That's what everyone says in these situations, right? But I did check, and now I can't forget what happened that night at Riverside Commerce Building. I need to write it down, to make sense of it. Maybe someone will believe me. It was Tuesday, October 15th. I remember because I had a major deadline the next morning. Quarterly reports that my boss, Thompson, needed by 9 a.m. sharp. The cleaning crew had left hours ago, and the old building's heating system had switched to night mode, making the radiators tick and pop in that familiar way. I'd been crunching numbers at my desk since 8 a.m., surviving on vending machine coffee and stale granola bars. The clock on my computer showed 11:42 p.m. when the first bang echoed through the empty office. I jumped, knocking over my cold coffee. The sound came from down the hall, near the storage room. The storage room. Just thinking about it makes my hands shake. It's an old room from when this building was a textile factory in the 1920s. Heavy oak door, brass handle, always locked. We keep old files and equipment there now. I'd only been inside once during my first week, when Thompson gave me the office tour. The bang came again, louder this time, like someone hitting a metal filing cabinet with their fist. I stood up, my chair squeaking against the linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked to my office door and peered into the hallway. Bang, bang, bang. The sounds got louder, more insistent, like someone was trapped inside trying to get out. But that was impossible. The door was always locked, and I had the only key on this floor, a heavy brass thing Thompson had given me for emergencies. I reached for my phone to call security, then remembered they'd left at 10 p.m. Budget cuts. The night guard only patrolled the ground floor now. The banging continued, rhythmic and desperate. What if someone was actually trapped in there? Maybe one of the cleaning staff had gotten locked in somehow. I couldn't just ignore it. I walked down the dark hallway, my footsteps echoing on the worn carpet. The emergency lights cast long shadows on the walls. The banging got louder as I approached. My hands were sweating as I pulled out the key. The brass handle was ice cold. I turned the key and the old lock clicked open. The banging stopped instantly. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door open. "Is someone in here?" The storage room was pitch black. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling against the wall. When I found it, the fluorescent tubes flickered to life with a buzz. Empty. The room was completely empty of people. Just rows of metal filing cabinets, cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, and old office furniture covered in dust sheets. But something was wrong. The air felt different, heavy and thick with a musty smell that made my nose wrinkle, like wet cardboard and rotting wood. The temperature dropped suddenly. I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. My skin prickled with goosebumps. It had to be at least 20 degrees colder than the hallway. I took a step inside, my shoes crunching on something. Looking down, I saw a thin layer of frost coating the concrete floor. That wasn't possible. It was October, and the building's heating was still working. I could hear the radiator ticking in the hallway behind me. The door slammed shut. I spun around, grabbing for the handle. It wouldn't turn. I pulled harder, rattling it, but it was locked somehow. The key was still in my hand, but when I tried to put it in the lock, it wouldn't fit, like the lock had changed shape. The lights flickered, and the musty smell got stronger. A shadow moved in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the rows of filing cabinets stretching into the darkness at the back of the room. My phone. I pulled it out of my pocket with shaking hands. No signal. Of course there was no signal. The storage room walls were thick concrete, and we'd always had reception problems down here. Another movement caught my eye. This time, when I turned, I saw one of the dust sheets ripple. There was no wind in here. No vents. No windows. Nothing that could make fabric move like that. The temperature dropped again. The frost on the floor spread, crackling as it formed. My teeth started chattering. I could feel the cold seeping through my shoes, numbing my feet. Bang. The sound came from inside one of the filing cabinets. Then another, and another. All around the room, metal drawers began to shake and rattle. The noise was deafening in the enclosed space. I backed up against the door, trying the handle again, still locked. The banging got louder, faster. Dust sheets began to flutter violently, like they were being whipped by a storm. Papers flew out of boxes, swirling in the air. The lights flickered faster now, strobe-like flashes that turned the room into a series of frozen moments. In one flash, I saw a figure standing at the back of the room. Tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling. In the next flash, it was closer. The next flash, closer still. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The cold had reached my chest, making each breath painful. The figure was getting closer with each flicker of the lights. I could smell its presence, that overwhelming stench of decay and age. Flash, 10 feet away. Its form was wrong, limbs too long, joints bent at impossible angles. Flash, 5 feet. I could see where its face should be, just smooth, pale skin stretched over bone. Flash, 3 feet. A hand reaching toward me, fingers like pale spider legs. The lights went out. I felt something cold brush against my cheek. A whisper in my ear, in a voice that sounded like rustling paper. "You shouldn't be here," I screamed. My body finally responded, and I slammed myself against the door. It burst open, sending me sprawling into the hallway. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I reached my car in the parking lot. The next morning, I arrived at work late. Thompson was angry about the quarterly reports, but I couldn't care less. I walked straight to the storage room. The door was locked, just like always. When I unlocked it, everything was normal. No frost, no scattered papers. The temperature was fine, but the smell was still there. Faint, but unmistakable. And when I checked the security footage from the previous night, trying to prove to myself that something had happened, I found that the cameras had stopped recording between 11:40 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. Just static. I gave my 2 weeks' notice that afternoon. Found a new job across town. But I still dream about that night, about the cold and the banging and that figure in the darkness. Sometimes when I'm working late at my new office, I hear a faint knocking sound. And even though I know it's just the heating system or the building settling, I pack up my things and leave. Because now I know what lives in old buildings after dark, what hides in locked rooms and empty spaces, what waits behind closed doors, making sounds that shouldn't be there, hoping someone will be curious enough to investigate. I know, and I can never forget. I've written this down as a warning. If you're working late and you hear strange sounds coming from somewhere you know should be empty, don't investigate. Don't unlock any doors. Just leave. Leave immediately. Because if you open that door, like I did, you might find out that some rooms aren't meant to be opened. Some spaces aren't meant to be explored, and some things are locked away for a very good reason. I still have nightmares about what I saw in that storage room, but what really keeps me awake at night is a different thought. What if I hadn't been able to get out? What if that thing had kept me there in that cold darkness? What if I'd become another sound in the night, banging on the door, hoping someone would be foolish enough to check? Sometimes when I drive past my old office building late at night, I look up at the windows. Most are dark, but occasionally I see a light on in someone's office. Someone working late like I used to. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a shadow move behind those lit windows. Something tall and wrong, with 2 long limbs and no face. I want to warn them, to tell them to go home before it gets dark. But who would believe me? Who would listen to a story about impossible cold and locked doors that unlock themselves and figures that shouldn't exist? So I drive on, and I hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they never have to learn what I learned that night, that some sounds should go uninvestigated, some doors should stay locked, and some rooms should remain unopened. Because now I know the truth about old buildings and empty rooms. They're not always as empty as they seem. And sometimes when something makes a sound it shouldn't make, the worst thing you can do is go and check. I know that now. I just wish I'd known it then. My hands were shaking when I pulled that piece of paper from the coat pocket. Just a folded scrap, yellowed and creased, with 5 words scrawled in messy handwriting. I should have thrown it away, should have tossed it in with the other garbage I was sorting through at the thrift store. Instead, I read those words again. Now he is behind you. I've worked at Second Time Around Thrift for 3 years now. Every day I sort through the donations, price items, stock shelves. It's mindless work, but it pays the bills. That Tuesday started like any other. Mountains of garbage bags filled with clothes dumped at our back door overnight. I was going through them one by one, separating what we could sell from what needed to be trashed. The coat was nothing special. Brown wool, probably from the 80s, with worn elbows and a torn lining. As I checked the pockets before throwing it in the reject pile, my fingers brushed against paper. Probably an old receipt or grocery list, but I always check. You'd be amazed what people forget in their pockets. Cash, jewelry, love letters, photographs. When I unfolded the note, the hair on my arms stood up. The handwriting was jagged, pressed deep into the paper like whoever wrote it was desperate. Just those 5 words, no date, no signature. I looked behind me. Empty sorting room, just clothes and boxes. But my neck tingled, like someone had just blown cold air across it. Get it together, I muttered. I crumpled the note and aimed for the trash can, but I couldn't let go. Something about those words dug into my brain. I smoothed the paper out and slipped it into my pocket. The rest of my shift crawled by. Every few minutes my hand would drift to my pocket, touching the note through the fabric. Twice I caught myself looking over my shoulder at nothing. By the time I clocked out at 6, I was jumpy enough that I rushed to my car without saying goodbye to anyone. The drive home was normal. Traffic was light, sky going dark with winter coming on. I live alone in a small ranch house on the outskirts of town. Used to love how quiet it was out there. As I pulled into my gravel driveway, the silence felt different, heavy, watching. I went through my usual routine, kicked off my shoes, microwaved leftover pasta, grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat down to watch TV, but I couldn't focus on the screen. The note was still in my pocket, burning against my leg. I took it out and set it on the coffee table. The first knock came at 8:47. 3 sharp raps on my kitchen door. I muted the TV, heart suddenly pounding. Nobody uses that door. It opens onto my backyard, which is fenced in. The only way to reach it is through the gate, which I always keep locked. I waited, barely breathing. Nothing but silence. Then, 3 more knocks, harder this time. I stood up slowly, legs shaking. "Who's there?" My voice came out as a croak. No answer. I crept to the kitchen, staying away from the windows. The door was solid wood with no window. The knocking came again, right in front of me. Bang, 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 I jumped back, stumbling against the counter. "This isn't funny," I shouted. "I'm calling the police." I grabbed my phone from my pocket with trembling fingers. As I dialed 911, something scraped against the door, like nails or claws being dragged down the wood. The sound went on, setting my teeth on edge. The 911 operator answered. I tried to explain, but halfway through describing the knocking, it stopped. Complete silence fell. I waited, phone pressed to my ear, while the operator asked if I was still there. I think they're gone," I said finally. "I'm sorry. Maybe it was just kids playing a prank." But I knew it wasn't kids. The scratching had come from too high up the door. And something about the rhythm of those knocks, deliberate, patient, like whatever was out there had all the time in the world. I spent the next hour checking all my doors and windows. Everything was locked tight. I drew all the curtains and turned on every light in the house. The note sat on my coffee table where I'd left it. I picked it up, read those 5 words again. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. A sound from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and heavy, creaking across the floor of my bedroom. But I live in a ranch house. There is no upstairs. I ran, grabbed my keys and phone, yanked open the front door, and stopped dead. All the lights on my street were out. Not just porch lights or house lights, but the street lamps too. Pure darkness pressed against my doorway like a solid wall. The footsteps were getting closer, coming down stairs that didn't exist. each creak bringing them nearer. I slammed the door and locked it, then ran to the kitchen. Had to get out the back door, had to run, The kitchen door was open. I knew I'd checked it, knew it had been locked, but now it stood wide open to the night. Cold air poured in, carrying a smell like wet earth and rotting leaves. Beyond the doorway was nothing but blackness. The footsteps reached the bottom of the imaginary stairs. They started down my hallway, slow and steady. Each step made the floor vibrate under my feet. I backed away from the open door, bumping into the kitchen counter. My phone was in my hand. I could call 911 again, call someone, anyone. But when I looked at the screen, it was black. Not turned off. Black, like someone had filled the screen with ink that swirled and shifted as I watched. The footsteps reached the kitchen doorway. I couldn't look, didn't want to see what was making those heavy steps. But my eyes were drawn up against my will. Nothing. The doorway was empty. But the footsteps kept coming, crossing the kitchen tile. Getting closer. Closer. The note was still clutched in my other hand, crumpled into a ball. As the invisible steps reached the center of my kitchen, I uncurled the paper with shaking fingers. The words had changed. Told you so. Something cold brushed against my shoulder. A hand, but wrong. Too many fingers, too long, too cold. I spun around and I woke up on my kitchen floor. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The back door was closed and locked. My phone lay next to me, working normally. Everything looked exactly as it should, except for the deep scratches gouged into my kitchen door, except for the muddy footprints on my tile floor. Huge prints, not made by any human feet, except for the note, now torn to shreds and scattered across the counter. I called in sick to work, spent the morning in a daze trying to convince myself it had been a dream or a hallucination. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt those cold fingers on my shoulder. Every silence seemed to hide footsteps. That was yesterday. I'm writing this all down now because I need someone to know what happened. Need there to be a record. Because it's getting dark again, and I can hear something moving around in the crawl space under my house. Something big, dragging itself closer to the access panel in my hallway floor. The scratching has started again, this time coming from underneath. The panel is rattling, metal groaning as something pushes up from below. I should run, should get in my car and drive until I run out of gas, but I know it wouldn't matter. Those 5 words keep echoing in my head. Now he is behind you. And he is. I can feel him standing there, even though when I turn around there's nothing but empty air. Can smell wet earth and decay getting stronger. Can hear breathing that isn't mine. The access panel just broke open. I hear something pulling itself out, joints cracking as it unfolds. Heavy footsteps on the hallway floor, coming closer, closer. If you're reading this, don't look in coat pockets at thrift stores. Don't read notes left by strangers. Don't. He's here. A week has passed, but my hands still shake when I think about what happened in that factory. The doctors say I'm experiencing acute stress disorder. They've prescribed pills that are supposed to help me sleep. But pills can't erase what I felt that night, what brushed against me in that dark corridor. I need to write this down to get it out of my system. Maybe then I'll stop jumping at every shadow. It started as just another urban exploration trip with my usual crew, Mike, Sarah, and Danny. We'd been doing this for 2 years, checking out abandoned buildings around the Rust Belt. The old Riverside manufacturing plant had been on our list for months. The massive complex had shut down in 2008, leaving behind 5 acres of deteriorating industrial buildings. I remember the exact moment we pulled up to the chain-link fence that Thursday night. The factory's broken windows stared down at us like empty eye sockets. The security light above the loading dock flickered weakly, creating moving shadows that made the building seem alive. Danny had his usual shit-eating grin as he cut through the fence with his bolt cutters. "Ladies and gentlemen, dinner is served," he said, pulling back the fence to create an opening. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Real classy, Dan." Mike was already checking his camera gear. Remember, guys, we stick together. No wandering off alone this time. He looked directly at me when he said this. Last month, I'd separated from the group in an abandoned hospital and ended up falling through some rotted floorboards. Nearly broke my leg. Yeah, I got it, I said, adjusting my headlamp. Team safety first. The late October air bit through my jacket as we crossed the empty parking lot. Weeds had broken through the asphalt, creating a maze of cracks. Our footsteps crunched on broken glass and gravel. The sound echoed off the factory walls, making it seem like someone was walking behind us. The main entrance was boarded up, but we found a broken window on the ground floor. Danny went first, then Sarah, followed by Mike. I brought up the rear. As I climbed through, my boot caught on the windowsill. I stumbled, sending an empty soda can skittering across the floor. The metallic sound rang out in the darkness. "Smooth move," Danny whispered. The beam of my headlamp cut through the gloom. We were in what looked like an old break room. Trash and debris covered the floor. A row of rusted lockers lined one wall, their doors hanging open. The ceiling had partially collapsed, letting in slivers of moonlight. Mike was already taking photos, his camera flash briefly illuminating the room in harsh white light. Sarah walked over to one of the lockers and peered inside. "Check this out," she said, pulling something out. It was an old time card, the paper yellow with age. "Says 1986. Wonder what happened to whoever this belonged to." "Probably retired to Florida," Danny said. "Or dead." We moved deeper into the building, following what appeared to be the main corridor. Our headlamp beams bounced off peeling paint and exposed pipes. Every few feet, doorways opened into dark rooms filled with silent machinery. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. The layout was confusing, a maze of interconnected hallways and production areas. Mike kept checking his phone, trying to match our location to the building plans he'd found online. After about 20 minutes, we reached a large open space that must have been the main production floor. The ceiling here rose at least 40 feet, supported by massive steel beams. Rows of assembly lines stretched into the darkness. Conveyor belts hung limp like dead snakes. Above us, a network of catwalks crisscrossed the space. "This is incredible," Mike said, his camera clicking rapidly. "The scale of this place." Sarah was already climbing onto one of the conveyor belts. "Hey guys, I bet we can follow this to see where it goes." We spent the next hour exploring the production floor, documenting everything with photos and video. Danny found an old control panel and pretended to operate it, making machine noises like a kid. Sarah discovered a collection of employee photos still hanging on a bulletin board in what had been a supervisor's office. The faces stared out at us from behind clouded plastic, frozen in time. It was when we decided to check out the second floor that things started to feel wrong. The steel stairs creaked under our weight as we climbed. At the top, the hallway split in two directions. "Left or right?" Danny asked. Mike consulted his phone. "Left should take us toward the administrative offices. Right goes to more production areas. Offices might have more interesting stuff to find," Sarah said. "Documents, photos, that kind of thing." We turned left. This corridor was narrower than the ones downstairs. The ceiling was lower too, creating a more claustrophobic feeling. Water damage had caused the walls to bubble and peel. Every few yards, black mold spread across the surface like bruises. The offices were in bad shape. Years of exposure to the elements had rotted most of the furniture. Paper lay everywhere, turned to pulp by water and time. The few items that remained intact were covered in a thick layer of dust. Sarah found an old desk calendar, still open to October 1986. She photographed it while Danny rummaged through filing cabinets. Mike was focused on capturing the decay, the way nature was slowly reclaiming the space. I hung back, scanning my light beam across the walls. Something about this area felt different. The air seemed heavier, more oppressive. I noticed the temperature had dropped several degrees. "Hey guys," I called out. "Anyone else feel how cold it got up here?" "Old buildings like this always have weird temperature changes," Mike said, not looking up from his camera. "Probably just a draft from somewhere." We continued moving through the offices. The corridor took several turns, leading us deeper into the building. I tried to keep track of our route, but soon lost my bearings. The identical doorways and peeling walls all blended together. After about 15 minutes, we reached another set of stairs leading up to the third floor. A metal sign, barely legible under years of grime, read, "Executive Offices." "Should we check it out?" Danny asked. Sarah checked her watch. "We've been here almost 2 hours. Maybe we should start heading back." "Come on, we're already here," Danny said. "When are we going to get another chance to see this place?" Before anyone could respond, a loud crash echoed from somewhere behind us. We all jumped, our headlamp beams swinging wildly around. "What was that?" Sarah whispered. "Probably just something falling," Mike said, but his voice was tense. "These places are always settling." We stood silent for a moment, listening. The only sound was our breathing and the faint drip of water somewhere in the darkness. "Let's just check out the third floor quickly and then head back," Danny suggested. No one argued. We climbed the stairs, the metal steps ringing hollow under our feet. At the top, we found ourselves in a short hallway ending in a set of double doors. Brass letters on the wall spelled out, "Boardroom." The doors were locked, but Danny made quick work of them with his crowbar. They opened with a grinding screech that set my teeth on edge. Our lights revealed a large conference room dominated by a massive wooden table. The far wall was all windows, though most of the glass was broken. "Now this is more like it," Danny said, walking around the table. "Check out this view." We spread out to explore the room. Mike focused on photographing the elaborate light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. Sarah examined the built-in cabinets along one wall. I walked over to the windows, careful to avoid the broken glass on the floor. From this height, I could see most of the factory complex spread out below. The moonlight gave everything a silvery, otherworldly quality. Movement caught my eye, probably a bird or a plastic bag caught in the wind. That's when I first felt it, a slight change in the air pressure, like when someone walks past you very quickly. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but they were all still occupied with their exploring on the other side of the room. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was just a draft from the broken windows, but something felt off. The sensation had been too distinct, too purposeful. "Hey guys," I said, my voice sounding strange in my ears. "I think maybe we should..." Before I could finish, all our headlamps flickered simultaneously. For a split second, we were plunged into complete darkness. When the lights came back on, everyone was looking around nervously. "Okay, that was weird," Sarah said. "Battery interference, maybe?" "All 4 lights at exactly the same time?" Mike asked. "That's not normal." "Let's get out of here," I said. Something in my tone must have conveyed my unease because no one argued. We made our way back to the stairs, moving faster than before. The temperature seemed to be dropping rapidly. I could see my breath forming clouds in my headlamp beam. As we descended to the second floor, I noticed the sounds of our footsteps had changed. Instead of 4 sets of steps, I could distinctly hear 5. The extra footfalls were slightly out of sync with ours, like someone following just a bit too slowly. I stopped and turned around, shining my light up the stairs. Nothing was there, but the footsteps continued for a fraction of a second after we'd all stopped moving. "Did anyone else hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Danny said, but I could see the tension in his face. Before I could explain, a door slammed somewhere above us. The sound echoed through the stairwell like a gunshot. Sarah let out a small scream. "Run," Mike said quietly. Then louder, "Run." We bolted down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I was at the back of the group again. As we reached the second floor landing, I felt it again, that sensation of something passing close by. But this time it was stronger, more defined. I could have sworn I felt fabric brush against my arm, and then I heard it, a deep, raspy breath right behind my left ear. I froze. The others were already halfway down the corridor, their headlamp beams bouncing wildly as they ran. I wanted to call out to them, but my voice wouldn't work. The breathing continued, heavy and wet, like someone who had been running for a long time. Slowly, fighting against every instinct screaming at me to run, I turned my head. My headlamp illuminated empty air, but the breathing didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. That's when I noticed the dust motes in my light beam. They were swirling in a distinct pattern, as if being disturbed by something I couldn't see. Something roughly the size and shape of a person. The scream that tore from my throat didn't sound human. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, chasing after the retreating lights of my friends. The breathing followed me, along with the sound of rapid footsteps that were definitely not my own. I caught up with the others at the bottom of the main stairs. They were waiting for me, faces pale in the glow of their headlamps. "What happened?" Mike demanded. "What was that scream?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed back up the stairs, trying to catch my breath. That's when we all heard it. Footsteps descending the stairs behind me. Heavy, deliberate steps. But our lights showed nothing there. We ran for the exit. I don't remember much of that journey through the dark corridors. Everything was a blur of panic and adrenaline. Somehow we found our way back to the broken window we'd entered through. Danny went through first, then helped Sarah. Mike pushed me ahead of him. As I climbed through, I felt something grab my ankle. The touch was ice cold and felt like fingers, but when I kicked and yanked my leg free, nothing was visible. We didn't stop running until we reached Mike's car. Sarah was crying. Danny looked like he was going to be sick. Mike's hands were shaking so badly he dropped his keys twice before managing to unlock the doors. As we peeled out of the parking lot, I looked back at the factory. In a third-floor window, the boardroom where we'd been, I saw a light. Not our headlamps, but a pale, bluish glow. As I watched, it moved away from the window and disappeared into the darkness. The police didn't believe us when we reported what happened. They said we were probably spooked by homeless people or other urban explorers. The building inspector we talked to told us that the third floor of that section had been condemned and sealed off in 1986 after a fatal accident. He wouldn't give us details. I've done some research since then. In October 1986, a factory foreman named Robert Henley disappeared during his night shift. His body was never found. The official report said he probably fell into some machinery, but no trace of him was ever discovered. The factory closed its third-floor executive offices after that, and rumors spread about strange sounds and unexplained accidents. I haven't gone urban exploring since that night. The others haven't either. Sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment, I think I hear heavy breathing behind me. When I turn around, nothing's there, but the air feels colder, and the dust motes dance in patterns that look almost like footprints. I know what I felt in that factory. I know what we all heard. But I also know that no one will ever believe us. Some things are better left unexplored, some places better left abandoned, and some stories, like this one, are better left untold. But I still check behind me every time I walk down a hallway, and I never ever want to be the last person in line again. I still wake up some nights with my heart racing, sheets soaked in sweat, remembering that weekend at Blackwood Trail. The rational part of my brain tells me there has to be a logical explanation for what happened, but my body remembers the terror. This is everything that occurred during those 48 hours as best as I can recall it. It started as a normal camping trip. Mark and I had been planning it for weeks, just a regular 2-day getaway to disconnect from our phones and drink some beers around a campfire. We'd known each other since college, and these weekend trips had become our tradition. This one was supposed to be like all the others. We picked a spot we'd never been to before, about 3 hours north of Seattle, following a recommendation from Mark's co-worker, who said the fishing was good there. We arrived at the trailhead around 2 in the afternoon on Saturday. The parking lot was empty except for a beaten-up red pickup truck parked in the corner. The air was cold and damp, typical Pacific Northwest weather for early October. I shouldered my pack while Mark checked his phone one last time before we lost signal. "Forecast says clear skies tonight," he said, stuffing the phone in his jacket pocket. "Should be perfect for stargazing." The trail started off easy enough. winding through tall Douglas firs and western red cedars. Our boots crunched on fallen leaves and broken twigs. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional bird call and the sound of a stream somewhere in the distance. After about an hour of hiking, we found a decent clearing about 50 yards off the main trail. "This looks good," Mark said, dropping his pack. "Flat ground, good tree coverage, close enough to water." I agreed, and we started setting up camp. We had it down to a science after years of doing this. Mark handled the tent while I gathered firewood and cleared a space for the fire pit. By 4 o'clock, we had everything set up. Our 4-person tent, camp chairs, and a neat pile of firewood ready for later. We spent the afternoon fishing at the nearby stream. The water was clear and cold, running fast over smooth rocks. We caught a couple of small trout, nothing worth keeping, so we released them back. As the sun started to set, we headed back to camp to start dinner. That's when I noticed the first odd thing. Our camp chairs had been moved. Not knocked over by the wind, moved. They were now facing the trees instead of the fire pit where we'd left them. Mark didn't seem concerned. "Probably some hikers passed by and used them for a quick rest," he said, turning them back around. I nodded, but something felt off. We hadn't seen or heard anyone else on the trail all day, and our camp wasn't visible from the main path. Still, I pushed the thought aside and focused on getting the fire started. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset. We sat around the fire, eating freeze-dried stroganoff and drinking beer, swapping the same old stories we always did. Everything felt normal until about 9 o'clock, when Mark suddenly stopped mid-sentence and tilted his head. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first, all I could hear was the crackling of the fire and the usual forest sounds. Then I heard it. Voices. They were too far away to make out any words, but they sounded like they were coming from somewhere in the darkness behind our tent. The voices were muffled, like people trying to talk quietly but not quite succeeding. "Hello?" Mark called out. His voice echoed slightly through the trees. No response. We sat in silence for a few minutes, straining to hear more. The voices had stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam through the trees, but the light only reached about 30 feet before being swallowed by darkness. Nothing moved in the illuminated areas except shadows cast by the swaying branches. "Probably just other campers," I said, not believing it myself. The voices hadn't sounded like normal camping chatter. They'd sounded urgent, almost angry, like people having an argument but trying to keep their voices down. We stayed up another hour, but the voices didn't return. The fire had burned down to embers when we decided to turn in. I made sure our food was properly stored in the bear canister and placed it far from our tent. Inside the tent, I checked that my knife was within reach, then slipped into my sleeping bag. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The moon was bright enough that I could see Mark's outline in his sleeping bag next to me. He was sitting up, completely still. "Mark," I whispered. "There's someone out there," he whispered back. "Listen." I held my breath. Footsteps crunched in the leaves outside our tent, slow and deliberate. They circled the tent once, twice, then stopped near the entrance. The shadow of a figure fell across the tent wall, visible in the moonlight. It stood there, not moving, not making a sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for my knife with trembling fingers. The shadow remained still for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it moved away, and the footsteps resumed, heading into the forest. Neither of us spoke until the sound had completely faded away. Mark switched on his flashlight. "We need to check outside," he said. "Are you crazy? We should stay in the tent. What if they're messing with our food, or our cars?" He had a point. We couldn't afford to lose our supplies or end up stranded. We grabbed our flashlights and knives and unzipped the tent as quietly as possible. The clearing looked exactly as we'd left it. The fire pit held cold ashes. Our chairs sat empty around it. The bear canister was untouched. We swept our lights through the surrounding trees but saw nothing unusual. "Look at this," Mark said suddenly. His light beam was focused on the ground near the tent. A single boot print was pressed into the soft earth, much larger than either of our boots. We did a complete circuit of our campsite, finding nothing else out of place. The forest had fallen silent. No insects chirping, No night birds calling, just absolute silence. Maybe we should pack up, I suggested. Hike out now. Mark shook his head. It's too dangerous to hike at night. We'd probably break an ankle or get lost. Better to wait until morning. We went back into the tent, but neither of us slept. We sat up, backs against our packs, knives ready. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made us flinch. Around 3 in the morning, the voices returned. They were closer this time, and there were more of them. They seemed to be all around us, moving through the trees, still speaking in those urgent, muffled tones. I couldn't make out any words, but the voices didn't sound entirely right. The cadence was off, the pitch unusual. Then we saw the shadows. Our tent was illuminated by the moon, and dark shapes moved across the walls, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, moving in ways that weren't quite natural. They passed back and forth, circling our tent like sharks. Mark gripped my arm so hard it hurt. Neither of us dared to breathe. The shadows kept moving, and the voices grew louder, more agitated. Still no clear words, just that weird, muffled arguing. A sharp sound cut through the noise, the distinct snap of a branch breaking nearby. The voices stopped immediately. The shadows disappeared. Complete silence fell over the forest again. Eerie. The sound of tearing fabric filled the tent. A long slash appeared in the wall near our feet, as if cut by an invisible knife. Cold air rushed in through the opening. Mark's flashlight beam darted to the tear, but nothing was there. No knife, no hand, nothing visible that could have caused it. Another rip appeared on the opposite wall, then another. Tears opened up all around us, but we couldn't see what was causing them. The voices started again, louder now, almost at shouting volume, but still muffled, still incomprehensible. "Run!" Mark yelled. We grabbed our packs and burst out of the tent through the entrance, not waiting to unzip it properly, just tearing through the fabric. The clearing was empty. The voices came from all directions, but there was no one there. Nothing visible moved in the trees. We ran. We left everything except our packs, sprinting down the trail by moonlight. Branches whipped our faces. Roots tried to trip us. Behind us, the voices followed, keeping pace, getting closer. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. My lungs burned. My legs screamed for rest. But the voices kept coming. And now there were footsteps too. Dozens of them crashing through the undergrowth behind us. The sky was starting to lighten when we reached the parking lot. The red pickup truck was gone. We threw ourselves into my car, and I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before getting them into the ignition. As we peeled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror. Just a glimpse, but it was enough. Dark shapes stood at the tree line, impossibly tall and thin, watching us leave. We drove straight home without stopping. Neither of us spoke until we were back in the city, surrounded by normal Sunday morning traffic and confused joggers who stared at our scratched faces and torn clothes. "We need to go back," Mark said finally. "In daylight. Get our stuff. Report this to the Rangers." I agreed. We stopped at my place to clean up and grab some coffee, then drove back to the trailhead. It took us 3 hours to reach our campsite, following our own trail of broken branches and trampled undergrowth from our panicked flight. The clearing looked completely normal in the daylight. Our tent still stood there, slashed to ribbons. The camp chairs sat exactly where we'd left them. The fire pit held cold ashes. Even our bear canister was untouched, but there were no footprints except our own. No sign of the multiple people who must have made all those voices, all those footsteps. We searched the surrounding area and found nothing. No candy wrappers, no cigarette butts, no broken branches, no signs that anyone else had been there at all. We packed up what we could salvage and hiked out. We filed a report with the Rangers, who looked skeptical but wrote everything down. They said they'd investigate, but I never heard anything more about it. Mark and I still go camping sometimes, but never alone anymore, and never at Blackwood Trail. We've tried to find logical explanations for what happened. Maybe it was other hikers playing a cruel prank. Maybe we breathed some weird fungus spores that made us hallucinate. Maybe the isolation and darkness played tricks on our minds. But we both know what we heard. We both know what we saw in the moonlight. Those shadows that moved wrong, those shapes at the tree line. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear those muffled voices again, arguing in words I can't quite understand, and I know I'll never go back to those woods alone. I've told this story to a few people over the years. Most don't believe it, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. The rangers never found any evidence of other people being there that night. The slashes in our tent looked like they'd been made by a blade, but no other damage was found in the area. The only other strange detail came months later. I was looking through photos from previous camping trips and found one from that weekend. It was a simple shot of our campsite just after we'd set it up, before sunset. The tent, the chairs, the fire pit, everything looked normal. Except in the background, barely visible between the trees, there was something I hadn't noticed when taking the picture. A tall, thin shadow that didn't match any of the trees. A shadow that seemed to be looking right at the camera. I deleted the photo immediately. Some things are better left unexamined, some questions better left unanswered. But I still check my tent carefully every night before I go to sleep, looking for tears that shouldn't be there, listening for voices that shouldn't exist. The thing moved like a person but wasn't one. I know that now. 3 weeks ago, when I first saw it shuffling down the east corridor of County General at 3 a.m., I told myself it was just another patient who'd wandered out of their room. But patients don't have legs that bend backward at the knees. They don't leave wet footprints that evaporate in seconds. And they definitely don't disappear through solid walls into wings that have been locked and abandoned for 20 years. I've worked security at County General for 8 years. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Nothing fancy, just me, my flashlight, and endless rounds through fluorescent-lit hallways. Check the doors, monitor the cameras, help lost visitors find the emergency room, deal with the occasional drunk or rowdy family member, write my reports, clock out, go home. Simple, until that first night. I was doing my 3 a.m. round, starting from the ground floor lobby and working my way up. Everything normal. Mrs. Chen at the front desk was doing her crossword puzzle. The ER was quiet, just 2 patients being treated for minor injuries. The cafeteria was dark and locked. The gift shop's motion sensor light clicked on as I passed. 4th floor, psychiatric ward, all secure. 5th floor, maternity. Could hear a baby crying somewhere. 6th floor, oncology. The night nurse gave me a tired wave. 7th floor, mostly empty except for storage and some old administrative offices. Then the east corridor of the 8th floor. That's where things went wrong. I noticed the cold first. The heating system covers the whole building, but that hallway felt like a freezer. My breath came out in clouds. The fluorescent lights flickered, which wasn't unusual in the older sections of the hospital. What was unusual was the silence. Hospitals are never completely quiet, even at night. There's always some kind of background noise, ventilation systems, distant voices, equipment beeping. But this silence felt thick, like cotton in my ears. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet ahead, something moved. A figure, tall and thin, standing with its back to me. It wore what looked like a hospital gown, but dirty and torn. The head was bald, the skin gray-white like old putty. "Hey!" I called out. "Hospital policy. Identify yourself first, ask questions later. This area is restricted. You need to return to your room." The figure didn't respond. Instead, it started moving away from me, toward the sealed double doors at the end of the corridor. Its walk was wrong. Each step looked painful, the legs bending in ways that made my stomach turn. I reached for my radio. "Front desk, this is Jim. Got a patient wandering on 8 East, requesting backup." Static answered. I tried again. Nothing. The figure reached the double doors. The entrance to the old psychiatric wing, closed down in 2003 after a fire. The doors were chained and padlocked. I had just checked those locks 20 minutes ago. "Stop right there." I started walking faster, flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. "You can't go in there, it's dangerous." The figure paused. Slowly, its head began to turn. Not its body, just the head, rotating much further than a human neck should allow. I caught a glimpse of its face. No eyes, just smooth gray skin where eyes should be. A mouth that was too wide, filled with something that gleamed wet in my flashlight beam. My legs froze. Training kicked in. Assess the threat, maintain distance, call for backup. But my radio was still dead, and every instinct screamed at me to run. The thing's mouth opened. A sound came out, like wet meat being torn. Then it stepped backward, through the solid metal doors, and vanished. I stood there for what felt like hours, heart pounding, sweat freezing on my skin despite the cold. Finally, I forced myself to walk to the doors. The chains were intact. The padlock was secure. No sign that anything had passed through. But on the floor, a single wet footprint was slowly fading away. I ran, all the way back to the security office on the ground floor. Mrs. Chen looked up from her crossword puzzle as I burst in. "Jim, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I caught my breath. "Did you get my radio call?" "What call?" "Radio's been working fine all night." I checked the security cameras for the 8th floor. Nothing, just empty hallways. I pulled up the archived footage from 10 minutes ago. The timestamp showed me walking down the corridor, then stopping, standing still for almost 5 minutes, then running away. No figure in a hospital gown, no impossible creature, just me, apparently losing my mind. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? I've worked security long enough to know how it goes. Tell people you saw something impossible, and suddenly you're not reliable anymore. Best case, they think you're making things up for attention. Worst case, they start wondering if you're stable enough to do your job, so I kept quiet, did my rounds, wrote my reports. But I started noticing things. The 8th floor got colder every night. Equipment started malfunctioning, not just radios, but phones and cameras too. Always in that east corridor, always around 3 a.m. A week after the first incident, I saw it again. This time on the 7th floor, dragging itself along the ceiling like a spider, leaving those wet footprints that vanished seconds later. I ran again, checked the cameras again. Nothing. The third time was in the stairwell between 6 and 7. It was crouched in the corner, making that wet, tearing sound. When it saw me, it smiled. The smile went all the way up to where its eyes should have been. I started researching the hospital's history. The fire in the old psychiatric wing wasn't the only bad thing that happened there. In 1998, a patient named Michael Keene murdered 3 nurses and 2 other patients before killing himself. The official report said he used a stolen scalpel. Unofficial rumors said the bodies were found partially eaten. Keene had been tall and thin, bald from chemotherapy. The nurses' reports described him as unusually flexible, some kind of connective tissue disorder that let him contort his body in strange ways. I'm writing this now in the security office. It's 2:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, I have to start my rounds. The temperature is already dropping. My radio is starting to crackle with static. Yesterday, I found old blueprints of the 8th floor. The psychiatric wing isn't completely sealed off. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects it to the main building. According to the plans, it comes out in a storage closet on the 7th floor, the same closet where cleaning supplies keep going missing, and where the staff complains about strange sounds at night. I've been having dreams. In them, I'm walking through the old wing. The fire damage is still visible on the walls. There's something important I need to find there, something that was left behind when they sealed it off. In the dreams, I hear that wet tearing sound getting closer and closer, and I know somehow that the thing I've been seeing isn't Michael Keene. It's what he became, what was using his body even before he died. The night shift supervisor called me into his office yesterday, said I seemed distracted lately, asked if everything was okay at home, mentioned that other staff had noticed me talking to myself during rounds, said maybe I should take some time off. I didn't tell him about the thing in the hallways, didn't tell him about the dreams or the blueprints or the research I've been doing, just nodded and smiled and said I was fine, just not sleeping well. but I know what I have to do. Tonight, after my 3 a.m. round, I'm going into that maintenance tunnel. I need to see what's in the old wing, need to understand what this thing is and what it wants. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe the isolation and the long nights have finally broken something in my brain, or maybe something hungry has been living in this hospital for 20 years, wearing the skin of a dead man, waiting for someone to notice it. And maybe it's been calling to me, night after night, wanting me to follow it home. The temperature just dropped another 10 degrees. My coffee cup is vibrating on the desk. Static is getting louder on the radio. Time for my rounds. Update, 4:15 a.m. I found the maintenance tunnel. It was right where the blueprints showed it, behind a shelf of cleaning supplies. The lock was old and rusted. One hard pull and it broke off in my hand. The tunnel is narrow, concrete walls, no lights. My flashlight beam only reaches about 10 feet ahead. The air smells like mold and something else. Something meat-sweet and rotting. I can hear movement up ahead. Wet sounds. Breathing that's not quite breathing. The thing is waiting for me. I know that now. It's been waiting all along. My flashlight is starting to flicker. The battery was fresh when I started my shift. If anyone finds this, tell them I wasn't crazy. Tell them to seal up this tunnel. Tell them to burn this whole place down if they have to. It's looking at me now. No eyes, but it's looking at me. That smile is getting wider. I think I finally understand what it wants. It's so hungry, and I followed it home. The dream started 3 months ago. Every night the same dark forest. Every night the same hooded figure watching me from between the trees. And now, as I sit alone in my tent in the middle of nowhere, I know that what I feared most has finally happened. The thing from my dreams has crossed over into reality. I should have known better than to come on this camping trip. The signs were all there, but I need to write this down, to record what happened in case someone finds this later. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 34 and I work as an IT consultant in Seattle. Nothing special about me. Nothing that should have drawn its attention. It began with what I thought was just a recurring nightmare. I'd wake up at exactly 3:17 a.m., heart pounding, sheets soaked with sweat. In the dream, I'd be walking through a dense forest. The trees were packed so tight you could barely squeeze between them. No trail, no markers, just endless trunks disappearing into darkness. And then I'd see it, always in the same spot, always standing perfectly still. A figure in a black hood, impossibly tall and thin. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in shadow. It never moved, never spoke, just watched. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. The dreams were so vivid that I'd wake up with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves in my nostrils. I tried everything to stop them. Sleep medication, meditation, therapy. Dr. Roberts, my therapist, said it was just stress manifesting itself. Told me to take some time off work, maybe go somewhere with friends. Get out of your routine, she said. Do something fun and relaxing. That's how I ended up here on this camping trip with Mike and Steve. They'd been trying to get me to come hiking with them for years. When I finally said yes, they couldn't believe it. We drove 5 hours into the Cascade Mountains, following logging roads until we couldn't drive any further. The plan was to hike to Fisher Lake, spend 3 days fishing and camping, then head back. The first day went fine. We set up camp about a half-mile from the lake in a small clearing. Mike brought his expensive tent, Steve had his old reliable Coleman, and I borrowed my brother's 2-person North Face. We grilled hot dogs, drank some beers, told stupid stories around the campfire. Normal stuff. I even started to relax a little. That night I slept without dreaming for the first time in months. When I woke up, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind in the trees, no sounds of Mike or Steve moving around camp. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The clearing was empty. Their tents were gone. The fire pit was cold and clean, like it had never been used. Even their backpacks had vanished. My tent was the only sign that anyone had ever been here. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. The screen showed 3:17 a.m. That's when I saw it standing at the edge of the clearing. The same hooded figure from my dreams, but this time I wasn't going to wake up. It was taller than any human could be, at least 8 feet. Its black robe hung in perfect stillness, even though I could feel a cold breeze on my face. The hood was pointed slightly down, aimed directly at me. I'm writing this now because I need to keep my hands busy, need to focus on something other than the fact that it's still out there. I can see its shape through the tent wall, a darker shadow against the darkness. It hasn't moved in hours, just watching, waiting. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to make sense of this. Maybe I'm still dreaming. Maybe I had a mental breakdown and imagined the whole camping trip. Maybe Mike and Steve are playing some elaborate prank. But I know none of that is true. I know because I can smell that same wet earth and rotting leaves from my dreams, stronger than ever. I've checked my watch 12 times while writing this. It still says 3:17 a.m. It's been 3:17 a.m. for what feels like days now. Earlier I tried shouting for help. My voice seemed to die a few feet from my mouth, like the air itself was dead. I tried running. Made it about 20 yards before I realized I was just running in circles, always ending up back at my tent. Always with that figure standing in the exact same spot. The batteries in my flashlight are starting to die. The beam gets weaker every time I turn it on. I've been rationing my phone battery, but it's down to 12% now. I have 2 granola bars and half a bottle of water left. When those run out, the temperature keeps dropping. My sleeping bag isn't enough anymore. I can see my breath when I use the flashlight. The cold seems to be coming from the direction of the figure, like it's sucking all the warmth out of the air. I tried closing my eyes, counting to 10, doing all the things you're supposed to do when you think you're dreaming. Nothing works. Every time I open my eyes, it's still there, still watching. Sometimes I think I hear whispers coming from the woods. Not words exactly, more like the sound of dry leaves scraping against each other. But when I really focus on listening, there's nothing but that heavy, unnatural silence. I've started noticing details about the figure that I never saw in my dreams. The way its robe seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. How it's somehow perfectly black, darker than the darkness around it. The slight tilt of its hood when I move, tracking my every motion. My hands are shaking so bad now I can barely write, not just from the cold. A few minutes ago, or hours or days, I can't tell anymore, I saw something move under its robe. Just for a second, like something long and thin was writhing underneath the fabric. I've been trying to remember if there were any warning signs before the dream started, any reason why this thing chose me. But my life was completely normal. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, go to bed. Repeat. The most exciting thing I did was order takeout from a different place every Friday. The only unusual thing was that day in the parking garage 3 months ago. I was walking to my car after work when I felt something watching me. Turned around and saw nothing but shadows between the concrete pillars. But for just a moment I thought I saw something tall and dark move behind a column. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Now I know better. It was hunting me even then. The dreams weren't warnings. They were it teaching me to fear it. Training me like a dog to recognize its master. My phone's down to 5% now. The flashlight batteries finally died. The darkness keeps pressing closer, thicker than any natural night should be. I can barely see what I'm writing anymore. I think it's getting closer. Every time I look up, it seems a few inches nearer to my tent. Moving so slowly I can't actually see it move. But it's coming. The whispers are getting louder. Still not words, but almost. Like they're just on the edge of making sense. I don't want to hear what they're trying to say. 4%. I have to make a decision soon. Either stay in this tent until I freeze or starve or lose my mind, or 3%. The temperature just dropped again. I can feel ice crystals forming on my sleeping bag. 2%. The figure is definitely closer now. Close enough that I can see there's something wrong with its proportions. Arms too long, torso too narrow, nothing human about it at all. 1%, I'm going to run. Not in circles this time. Just pick a direction and go until I can't go anymore. Maybe that's what it wants. Maybe that's what it's been waiting for. If anyone finds this, tell my family I love them. Tell Mike and Steve I'm sorry. And if you're reading this in the woods, run. Run before it starts appearing in your dreams too. The battery's almost dead. It's time. I can hear something scratching against the outside of my tent. The nylon wall is bulging inward like something's pressing against it. The whispers are getting louder, almost words, almost. I shouldn't have agreed to watch Mike's house. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in his kitchen at 3 a.m., gripping a knife and staring at the ceiling. The sound started 2 hours ago. First the footsteps, then the banging. Now I'm trapped between fear and self-doubt, wondering if I'm losing my mind or if something is actually hunting me. It started normally enough. Mike asked me to watch his place while he took his family to Disney World for a week. Just check the mail, water the plants, make sure nobody breaks in, he said. Simple enough. I've known Mike since college, and his Victorian-style house always seemed nice, if a bit old. Sure, it needed some work, peeling paint on the trim, a few loose boards on the porch, but nothing scary. The first 2 days went fine. I'd stop by after work, bring in any packages, water his wife's herb garden, and check that all the doors and windows were locked. I even cleaned out their fridge so nothing would spoil while they were gone. Normal house-sitting stuff. Tonight was different. I decided to stay over since tomorrow's Saturday and I didn't have work. Mike said I could use the guest room whenever I wanted. I brought my laptop, planning to watch some movies and relax. Around 1 a.m., I was about to head up to bed when I heard it. Footsteps in the attic. At first, I tried to ignore them. Old houses make noise. That's what Mike always said whenever I commented on the creaks and groans during our game nights. But these weren't just random creaks. The footsteps moved with purpose, crossing from one end of the attic to the other, then back again. Heavy steps, like someone wearing boots. I froze in the living room, my heart pounding against my ribs. The TV was still playing some sitcom, but I couldn't focus on it anymore. All I could do was track those footsteps as they paced overhead. Back and forth, back and forth. My hands started shaking. Sweat broke out on my forehead. I grabbed my phone, pulled up Mike's number, then stopped. What would I say? Hey, I know you're at Disney World, but I think someone's walking around in your attic at 1 a.m. He'd think I was crazy. The footsteps stopped. The silence felt worse somehow. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. The house's heating system kicked in with a clunk that made me jump. My phone slipped from my sweaty fingers and clattered on the hardwood floor. That's when the banging started in the garage. Thud, thud, thud. Loud, deliberate impacts that shook the connecting wall between the garage and the house. It sounded like someone hitting the wall with something heavy. A sledgehammer maybe, or a piece of lumber. I snatched up my phone and retreated to the kitchen. It had the best lighting and the most weapons. Knives, heavy pans, anything I could use to defend myself. My fingers trembled as I pulled up the local police department's number. But again, I hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if I called the cops and they found out it was just the house settling or some raccoons in the garage? I'd look like an idiot, and Mike would never trust me to watch his place again. The banging stopped as suddenly as it began. New sounds filtered in. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing on the street outside, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Normal sounds that somehow made everything worse. I grabbed the biggest knife from the butcher block and leaned against the kitchen counter facing the door to the garage. My shirt was soaked with sweat sticking to my back. Every few seconds I had to adjust my grip on the knife handle because my palms were so wet. The garage door connecting to the kitchen had a small window in it, covered by a thin curtain. As I watched, a shadow passed behind it. Just a quick movement, there and gone, but unmistakable. Someone was in the garage. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I just stood there, knife raised, staring at that little window. The curtain fluttered slightly, like someone had brushed against it from the other side. I should run. I should get out of here right now, jump in my car and drive away. but my legs wouldn't move. And what if someone was waiting outside? What if there was more than one person? The footsteps in the attic started again, louder this time. They moved faster, more purposefully, heading toward the attic stairs that led down to the second floor. I heard the distinct sound of the attic door opening, its hinges squealing. My body finally unfroze. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the deadbolt. Behind me, heavy footsteps descended the attic stairs. The garage door handle started to turn. The deadbolt wouldn't budge. I'd locked it earlier, I was sure of it, but now it seemed stuck. I yanked harder, my fingers slipping on the metal. The footsteps reached the second floor hallway. The garage door began to open. With a final desperate twist, the deadbolt shot back. I yanked the door open and ran outside into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, parked at the curb. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before managing to unlock the door. As I slid behind the wheel, I looked back at the house. All the lights I'd left on were now off. Every window was dark. But there, in the attic window, I saw a face. Just for a second, illuminated by the streetlight. It wasn't human. I started the car and floored it, tires squealing against the pavement. In my rearview mirror, I watched Mike's house disappear into the darkness. My phone started ringing. It was Mike. I let it go to voicemail. What could I tell him? That his house was haunted? That something with a twisted, elongated face was living in his attic? That I'd abandoned my post and run away like a coward? The phone rang again. Still Mike. This time I answered. Hey, what's up? I tried to keep my voice steady. Are you okay? Mike's voice sounded strange, tight with tension. The security system just sent me an alert. All the motion sensors are going crazy. My stomach dropped. Motion sensors? You never mentioned any motion sensors. They're new. I had them installed last week after... He paused. After what happened to the last house sitter. What happened to the last house sitter? My voice cracked. Look, just get out of there if you haven't already. Don't go in the attic. Don't open the garage, I'm calling the police. I'm already gone, I said. I'm in my car. Mike, what's going on? What's in your house? He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. We bought the house 2 years ago. Everything was fine at first. Then people started seeing things, hearing things. The first house sitter disappeared. The police found her car in the garage, but no sign of her. We tried to sell, but no one would buy it. That's why we're at Disney World. We're not coming back. I'm sorry, I should have told you. Why did you let me stay there? Why did you ask me to watch it? Another long pause. Because it never bothers the owners. Only visitors. Only people who stay overnight. I thought if someone was there, watching the place, maybe nothing bad would happen while we're gone. Maybe it would stay quiet. Well, it didn't, I said. My hands were still shaking on the steering wheel. It's definitely not quiet. Where are you now? I looked around. In my panic, I'd driven aimlessly. I was on some dark back road surrounded by trees. I don't know exactly, but I'm far from your house. Good. Stay far away. I'll call the police, have them check it out. Just don't go back there. Not even during the day. Promise me. Trust me, I won't. I ended the call and pulled over to the side of the road. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty pavement ahead. Behind me, miles back now, something waited in Mike's house. Something that paced in the attic and banged on walls and had a face that wasn't human. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Police are on their way. They'll call you for a statement. I'm so sorry. I started driving again, heading for my apartment. The sun would be up in a few hours. Maybe in the daylight this would all seem like a bad dream. But I knew better. The weight of the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. I'd seen something tonight that shouldn't exist. Something that had already made one person disappear. As I drove, I couldn't shake the image of that face in the attic window. The way its features seemed to shift and stretch in the streetlight. The way it smiled when it saw me running. I also couldn't shake the guilt. Not about running away. Anyone would have run from that thing. No, I felt guilty about the next person, because there would be a next person. The house would sit empty for a while, but eventually someone would buy it. Some family would move in, thinking they'd found their dream home, and then they'd hear the footsteps in the attic. The police called an hour later. I told them everything, knowing they wouldn't believe me. They didn't. They searched the house, found nothing unusual, no signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone had been there besides me. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that somewhere in Mike's old Victorian house, something is waiting, pacing in the attic, banging on walls, watching through windows with its inhuman face, waiting for the next visitor, the next person to stay overnight, the next person to disappear. I've started researching the house's history, missing persons reports going back decades, previous owners who moved out suddenly, leaving everything behind, stories of strange sounds and faces in windows. Mike won't answer my calls anymore. His family never returned from Disney World. The house sits empty, its windows dark, its secrets locked inside. Sometimes, late at night, I think about driving past it, just to see if I can spot that face in the attic window again, just to prove to myself that it was real. But I don't. I can't. Because deep down, I know it would see me too, and this time it might not let me run away. The first time I heard the piano, I thought I was dreaming. 3 notes, sharp and clear, pierced through my sleep at 3:17 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the moment I sat up in bed, heart pounding against my ribs. The sound came from the basement of my new house, a place I'd only been twice since moving in 3 weeks ago. I bought this house in suburban Michigan because it was cheap, and because after my divorce, I needed to start over somewhere quiet. The realtor mentioned the previous owner had left some furniture behind, including an old upright piano in the basement. I didn't think much of it at the time. I don't play piano, and the thing looked unplayable anyway. Yellowed keys, rust on the strings I could see through the open top panel, and a thick layer of dust everywhere. That first night I lay in bed for 20 minutes after the sound stopped, telling myself it was just the house settling or maybe a mouse walking across the keys. But mice don't play 3 distinct notes in sequence. When I finally got up the nerve to check, my bare feet silent on the wooden stairs, the basement was exactly as I'd left it. The piano sat against the far wall, its wooden surface reflecting the weak light from my flashlight. I pressed one of the keys. It made a dull thunk, no musical tone at all. I didn't sleep well that night, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Moving to a new house alone does things to your mind. I spent the next day unpacking boxes in my home office, trying to make the place feel more like mine. I barely thought about the piano. Until 3:17 a.m. the next night. This time it was 5 notes forming the beginning of what sounded like a melody. I sat up immediately, fully awake, sweat already forming on my forehead despite the cool autumn air coming through my window. The sound was crisp and clear, not the work of a broken piano. I grabbed my phone and started recording before heading downstairs. My hands shook as I opened the basement door. The music stopped the instant my foot touched the first step. When I reached the bottom, everything was exactly the same as before. The piano looked dead and silent, covered in dust without a single fingerprint on its surface. I played the recording back. Nothing. Just the sound of my breathing and footsteps. This pattern continued for 2 weeks. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. the piano would play. Sometimes just a few notes, sometimes entire fragments of melodies I didn't recognize. Classical pieces maybe, but nothing I could identify. Each time I went to investigate, the music would stop before I reached the basement. Each time the piano showed no signs of being touched. I started sleeping less. Dark circles formed under my eyes. My coworkers on Zoom calls asked if I was feeling okay. I told them I was still adjusting to the new house. In a way, that was true. I tried setting up a camera in the basement. The footage showed nothing, just a dark, empty room with a dusty piano. But every night I heard the music. Every night it got a little longer, a little more complex. After the third week, I called the realtor. I needed to know more about the previous owner. "Let me check the records," she said. I could hear her typing. "Oh yes, Mr. Harrison. Elderly gentleman, lived there for 40 years. Died in his sleep about 6 months ago. His kids sold the house as is, didn't want to deal with clearing everything out. Why do you ask? Did he play piano? I'm not sure. The family didn't mention it, but they did say he was very insistent about leaving the piano in the basement. It was in his will, apparently. Odd request, now that I think about it. That night, I waited in my bed for 3:17 a.m. The music started right on schedule, but this time it was different. Not just a few notes or a short melody. It was a full piece, played with the skill of someone who had spent decades mastering the instrument. The sound filled the house, rising through the floorboards and vibrating in my chest. I didn't move. I lay there rigid, listening to every note. The piece lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than ever. My phone showed 3:24 a.m. when I finally got up. Each step down to the basement felt like moving through thick syrup. The air got colder as I descended. When I reached the bottom step, I noticed something different. The piano's lid was open. I approached slowly, flashlight beam steady on the dusty keys. No fingerprints, no disturbance in the dust. But as I leaned in closer, I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the strings, thick with rust just yesterday, now gleamed like new in my flashlight beam. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent hours researching the house's history. County records showed nothing unusual. Mr. Harrison had bought the place in 1980, lived there quietly, and died in his sleep this past spring. No criminal records, no strange incidents. Just a normal elderly man in a normal suburban house. I found his obituary online. The photo showed a thin man with kind eyes and white hair, wearing a cardigan and sitting in what looked like a living room. Not my living room, but somewhere else. The article mentioned he was survived by 2 children and 5 grandchildren. It said nothing about music, but at the bottom there was a line that made me freeze. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations be made to the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, where Mr. Harrison served as principal pianist for 30 years. That night, I set up my phone to record again. I sat in the basement, back against the cold concrete wall, waiting. The dust on the piano keys looked undisturbed in the beam of my flashlight. 3:16 a.m. My hands were sweating despite the basement's chill. 3:17 a.m. The first note made me jump even though I was expecting it. The sound didn't come from where I was looking. It seemed to come from inside the piano itself, as if the strings were vibrating without the hammers touching them. More notes followed, building into a complex piece I didn't recognize. I watched the keys move by themselves, each one dipping slightly and rising again as the music played. No dust disturbed, no visible mechanism at work, just music flowing out of a dead piano. The piece lasted exactly 7 minutes again. When it ended, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to my own breathing. Finally, I played back the recording on my phone. Nothing, just basement silence and the occasional creak of the house above. I started sleeping in the basement after that. I brought down a camping cot, a sleeping bag, and a small lamp. Every night at 3:17 a.m. the music would play. Every night it was the same piece, or something complex and beautiful that I couldn't identify. Every morning I'd wake up to find another piano string cleaned of rust, gleaming like new in my flashlight beam. After a week of sleeping in the basement, I noticed the keys were starting to whiten, the old yellowed ivory slowly returning to its original color. The wood of the piano began to shine in places, as if someone was carefully, gradually restoring it inch by inch. I tried playing the piano during the day. The keys still made dull, thunking sounds, no music at all. But each night, it produced perfect, crystal-clear tones. I found Mr. Harrison's son's phone number through some online searching. When he answered, I could hear children playing in the background. "Yes, that was Dad's piano," he said when I asked. "He played it every single day for as long as I can remember. Even after he retired from the symphony, he'd practice for hours. Mom used to joke that he loved that piano more than her. Do you know why he wanted it left in the basement? A pause. He got sick near the end. Arthritis in his hands. Couldn't play anymore. It broke his heart. He had the piano moved to the basement because he couldn't bear to see it every day, knowing he'd never play it again. But he wouldn't sell it. Said it still had music in it. I didn't tell him about the nightly concerts. Instead, I asked, what time did he usually practice? Early morning, before anyone else was awake. He said that's when the music was clearest. Mom said he'd get up at 3-something most days. Crazy old man. He laughed softly. Why do you ask? I thanked him and hung up. That night I did something different. At 3:16 a.m. I sat down at the piano bench. The wood felt cold through my pajama pants. I placed my hands on the keys, feeling the smooth ivory under my fingertips. Some of the keys were still yellowed, but others had returned to a pristine white. 3:17 a.m. The music started, but this time I could feel it through my hands. Each key moved under my fingers, guiding them. I wasn't playing. Something else was moving my hands, pressing each key with precision and skill I didn't possess. The music flowed through me, using me as a conduit. 7 minutes later, when the piece ended, my hands were shaking. I looked down at the keys. Where my fingers had touched, the ivory was completely restored, white and perfect. 3 more strings gleamed like new in the darkness inside the piano. The next night, I sat at the bench again. The same thing happened. My hands moved with the music, and more of the piano restored itself. Night after night, the process continued. Each time I felt less like I was being guided and more like I was learning, remembering something I'd never known. After a month, the piano was completely restored. Every key gleamed white in my flashlight beam. Every string shone like new, and the wood glowed with a rich, deep polish. During the day, I found I could play simple tunes, nothing like the complex pieces that filled the night, but actual music instead of dull thuds. Last night, I sat at the bench at 3:16 a.m. as usual. But when 3:17 came, there was only silence. I waited, hands on the keys, but no ghostly force moved my fingers. Instead, I felt an urge, a memory that wasn't mine, and I began to play. The piece flowed out of me as if I'd known it all my life. My fingers moved across the keys with confidence and skill, drawing forth the same complex melody I'd heard every night for the past month. 7 minutes later, when the final note faded, I sat in the darkness, listening to the silence. I understood then what Mr. Harrison meant about the piano still having music in it. He'd poured 40 years of his life into those keys, those strings. All those early mornings, all that passion and dedication, it couldn't just disappear. This morning, I looked up piano teachers in the area. I have my first lesson next week. After all, I have a lot of practicing to do. The piano is fully restored now, but it still needs someone to play it. And every morning I wake up at 3:17 a.m., sit down at the bench, and play the piece Mr. Harrison taught me, note by note, in the quiet hours before dawn. I didn't notice it the first night. Moving into a new place overwhelms your senses. The unfamiliar creaks, the different airflow, the way sound bounces off bare walls. But by the second night, there was no ignoring it. A thick, heavy smell that crept under my door around 3 a.m., like rotting meat left too long in a hot dumpster. I had just moved to Philadelphia from Chicago after my divorce. The apartment was all I could afford on short notice. A studio on the 5th floor of an old brick building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The rent was cheap, and I needed cheap. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, had barely looked at my application before handing over the keys. "Just don't make noise after 10 p.m., he'd said, his eyes never meeting mine. That second night, the smell woke me from a dead sleep. My throat closed up and I gagged, stumbling to the window to gulp fresh air. The smell filled every corner of the small space, dense, organic, wrong. I checked the mini fridge, the garbage can under the sink. Nothing. By sunrise, it had disappeared completely, leaving me wondering if I'd imagined it. The next night, it came back stronger. I stuffed a towel under my door, but it seeped through anyway. The smell wasn't coming from the hallway. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. My eyes watered and my stomach churned. Around 4 a.m. I heard it. Footsteps in the ceiling above me. Slow, deliberate steps moving back and forth. I knew that was impossible. I lived on the top floor. The footsteps continued for exactly 47 minutes. I know because I sat rigid in my bed watching the clock on my phone, too terrified to move. When they finally stopped, I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. By morning, both the smell and the footsteps were gone. I went to work at the garage where I'd found a job as a mechanic, exhausted and jumpy. That evening, I asked my neighbor across the hall, a tired-looking woman in scrubs, if she'd noticed any strange smells. "I work nights," she said flatly. "I'm never here after dark." She shut her door before I could ask anything else. The pattern continued. Each night the smell grew stronger, and the footsteps more numerous. They weren't just pacing anymore, they moved with purpose, following specific paths across my ceiling. Sometimes they'd stop directly above my bed, and I'd lie there, barely breathing, waiting for something to crash through. After a week, I started sleeping at a 24-hour diner down the street. The waitress, Rita, kept my coffee cup full and didn't ask questions when I dozed in the booth. But I couldn't avoid my apartment forever. My savings were dwindling and I needed real sleep. The next night, I forced myself to stay. The smell came right on schedule, thick enough to make my eyes water. The footsteps started at 3:17 a.m. But this time, there was something new. A scraping sound like fingernails dragging across the ceiling. I grabbed my phone and recorded the sound. The recording picked up the footsteps clearly, but when I played it back the next morning, the audio was distorted by a low, constant hum I hadn't heard in person. I went to the building manager's office. Mr. Peterson wasn't there, but his assistant, a skinny kid with acne, was. "The top floor?" he said when I described the footsteps. "That's impossible. There's just the maintenance crawl space up there. No one goes up there." "Can I see it?" He shook his head. "It's locked. Building code. Only Mr. Peterson has the key." I waited 3 days to catch Mr. Peterson. When I finally cornered him in the lobby, he listened to my story with an expression I couldn't read. "The previous tenant complained about similar things," he said slowly. "She moved out after 2 weeks. Why didn't you tell me?" He shrugged. "She was unstable, had problems. We get all types here." That night, the smell was different, sharper, more metallic. The footsteps came earlier, around 2 a.m. They moved faster, more agitated. The scraping turned into pounding like something was trying to break through. I called the police. They arrived at 3:45 a.m., 2 bored officers who clearly thought I was drunk or high. By then, the sounds had stopped. "We can't hear anything, sir," the female officer said. "And we don't smell anything unusual." "It was here," I insisted. "I recorded it." I played them the audio, but now all it captured was static. They left after writing a report I knew would go nowhere. I sat on my bed until sunrise, jumping at every creak and settling of the old building. The next day, I went to the public library and researched the building's history. It was built in 1922, originally as a hotel. In 1956, it was converted to apartments. There were the usual stories of deaths over the years, elderly residents passing in their sleep, a suicide in 1978, a drug overdose in 1995. Nothing that explained what was happening. But then I found an article from 1987 about a maintenance worker who disappeared. The police suspected he'd stolen from several apartments and run off, but they never found him. His name was Gerald Morton, and he'd worked in the building for 23 years. That night, I waited. The smell came at 2:45 a.m., rot and copper and something else I couldn't identify. The footsteps followed at 3:02 a.m., directly above my bed. Then the scraping started, but it wasn't on the ceiling anymore. It was coming from inside the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and pressed my ear against the wall. The scraping moved downward, getting louder. Something was in there. moving through the space between the walls. The maintenance crawl space. It had to connect to the wall somehow. I ran to the hallway. The scraping was inside the hallway walls now, moving toward the maintenance door at the end of the corridor. My hands shook as I approached the door. It was locked, like the assistant had said, but the lock looked old. I ran back to my apartment and grabbed my tools. 5 minutes later, I was picking the lock with a tension wrench and rake pick I used for working on old cars. The lock clicked open. The smell hit me like a physical force. My eyes burned and I gagged, but I forced myself to shine the flashlight inside. A narrow ladder led up into darkness. The scraping sound echoed from above. I climbed. The crawl space was tight, barely 4 feet high. I had to crouch, moving my flashlight beam across decades of dust. There were pathways in the dust, like something had been walking up here. Recently, the beam caught something in the corner. A pile of cloth. No, work clothes. They were stained dark, and when I got closer, I saw the name tag. Gerald. The scraping sound came from behind me. I spun around. A figure crouched in the darkness. It wore what remained of a maintenance uniform, but the fabric was rotted and hung from a frame that was too long, too thin. Its hands ended in yellowed, curved nails that had grown into claws. The head turned toward me, but where the face should have been, there was only dark, leathery skin stretched tight over bone. I ran. I don't remember climbing down the ladder or running to my car. I drove until sunrise, until I was 2 states away. I never went back to the apartment. I left everything there. My clothes, my furniture, all of it. I called Mr. Peterson once, from a burner phone, and told him to keep my security deposit. I thought you'd last longer than the others, he said, and hung up. I live in Arizona now. My new apartment is on the first floor of a new building. There are no crawl spaces, no maintenance doors, no unexplained sounds in the night. But sometimes, when I wake up at 3 a.m., I swear I can smell something, just for a second, like rotting meat and copper and dust. I try to tell myself it's just my imagination, but I know what I saw in that crawl space. And I know that somewhere in Philadelphia, in an old brick building with too many empty apartments, something is still walking across the ceiling every night, scraping at the walls, waiting for the next tenant who needs a cheap place to live. I know because I check the building's rental listings every few months. The turnover is constant. No one stays more than a few weeks, and the rent keeps getting cheaper. Mr. Peterson is still there, still managing the building, still not meeting anyone's eyes when he hands over the keys, still not telling new tenants about the smell or the footsteps, or what lives in the crawl space above their heads. Sometimes I think about calling the police, or a newspaper, or someone who might investigate. But what would I say? That a maintenance man who disappeared in 1987 never left the building? That he's still up there, changed into something that isn't human anymore? They'd never believe me. I wouldn't believe me if I hadn't seen it myself. So I stay in Arizona, in my first-floor apartment with its new walls and bright lights. I keep my tools nearby just in case. And every night at 3 a.m. I lie awake and listen, making sure the only footsteps I hear are from the living tenants above me. But sometimes in my dreams I'm back in that crawl space. The beam of my flashlight catches movement in the corner. Something turns to look at me with a face that isn't a face. And just before I wake up screaming, I hear the scraping of long nails on the inside of the walls, getting closer and closer, following me even here. I wake up covered in sweat, gasping for air. I check the walls, the ceiling, under the door. Everything is normal, everything is fine, but I know the truth. In that old building in Philadelphia, something is still walking across the ceiling every night, still scraping at the walls, still waiting, and the rent keeps getting cheaper. A security camera notification lit up my phone at 2:47 a.m. Someone was standing in my front yard, motionless, staring directly at my house. I wish I had never checked that alert. My throat felt like sandpaper when I woke up that night. The usual glass of water I keep by my bed was empty. I must have drunk it earlier without remembering. The house was dead quiet except for the low hum of the AC. My wife Sarah breathed steadily next to me, lost in sleep. I grabbed my phone to check the time. 2:45 a.m. The screen's brightness made me squint. 2 minutes later, while I was still trying to convince myself to get up and go downstairs for water, my phone buzzed. A notification from the security app popped up. Motion detected. Front yard camera. I clicked it without thinking much. We get these alerts all the time, usually just cats wandering through the yard or tree branches moving in the wind. The app opened to a live feed from the camera mounted above our front porch. My finger froze on the screen. A tall figure stood perfectly still in the middle of our front yard, about 20 feet from the house. Adult height, wearing what looked like dark clothes. The infrared night vision made everything greenish and grainy, but I could tell they were facing directly toward our front door. Just standing there, not moving at all. My chest got tight. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. I watched the feed for 30 seconds, waiting for the person to move or leave. They didn't budge an inch. "Sarah," I whispered, reaching over to shake her shoulder. She didn't wake up. I tried again, louder. "Sarah." She mumbled something and rolled over. The medication she takes for her insomnia knocks her out cold. I looked back at my phone. The figure was still there, in the exact same position. Standing. Staring. My mouth went from dry to completely parched. I needed to do something. Call the police? But what would I tell them? There's someone standing in my yard? They probably wouldn't consider that an emergency. And by the time they got here, the person would probably be gone. I got out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. The house felt different at this hour. Familiar shapes turned strange in the darkness. I went to our bedroom window, which overlooks the front yard. The streetlight on the corner cast an orange glow over everything. I could see our yard clearly. No one was there. I checked my phone again. The figure was still visible on the camera feed, standing in the exact same spot. But when I looked out the window, nothing. Just empty yard, still and quiet under the streetlight. My hand shook as I switched between the window view and my phone screen. How was this possible? The camera showed someone right there, plain as day, but I couldn't see anyone with my own eyes. I had to check. I had to know what was going on. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and grabbed the baseball bat we keep in the closet. The smooth wood felt reassuring in my grip. Our bedroom is on the second floor. I crept down the stairs, stepping over the third step from the bottom that always creaks. The first floor was dark except for the dim blue light from our router in the living room. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. The yard looked empty, just like from the window. I pulled out my phone again. The figure was still there on the camera feed, standing in the exact same position. My heart pounded against my ribs. I flipped on the porch light. The sudden brightness made me blink. Through the peephole, I could see our entire front yard illuminated. Still empty. My palms were sweating on the baseball bat. I unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as possible, then the doorknob. The door opened with a soft click. Cool night air hit my face. Crickets chirped in the bushes. A car passed on the main road a block away, its engine sound rising and fading. I stepped onto the porch, bat ready. The yard was empty. I walked to the exact spot where the figure appeared to be standing in the camera feed. The grass was dry and crisp under my feet. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, no flattened areas, nothing. I checked my phone again. The figure was there, supposedly right where I was standing, but there was nothing. I waved my hand through the air in front of me. Nothing. The back of my neck prickled. I spun around to look at the house. The porch light cast my shadow long across the lawn. The security camera was just visible, mounted under the eaves above the porch. Its small red light blinked steadily. I walked back to the porch and looked up at the camera. Everything seemed normal. No obvious signs of tampering. I opened the security app again and my stomach dropped. The figure was gone. I scrolled back through the footage. The figure appeared at exactly 2:47 a.m. standing motionless. At 3:12 a.m., about 30 seconds ago, it simply vanished. No walking away, no blur of movement. There one frame, gone the next. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. I went back inside, locked the door, and double-checked all the first-floor windows. Everything was secure. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, baseball bat across my lap, watching the security feed. Nothing else appeared. The next morning, I checked the camera thoroughly. No signs of hacking or tampering. The footage was still there. A dark figure standing motionless in my yard for exactly 25 minutes, then vanishing into thin air. I didn't tell Sarah. What would I say? That our security camera caught a ghost? That I was losing my mind? I deleted the footage and tried to forget about it. But every night since then, I wake up around 2:45 a.m. I check the camera feed with my heart in my throat, dreading what I might see. So far, nothing has appeared, but I know it's only a matter of time. Tonight, my phone just buzzed with a motion alert. It's 2:47 a.m. My hands are shaking as I open the app. The figure is back, standing in the exact same spot, but this time its head is turned. It's looking directly at the camera, and it's smiling. I know I should wake Sarah, call the police, do something, but I can't move. I'm frozen, staring at my phone screen as the figure raises one hand and slowly beckons to me. The worst part? I want to go outside. Some deep, primal part of me wants to walk out there, to find out what happens when I reach that spot in the yard. My legs are tensing, ready to carry me downstairs. I force myself to stay in bed. Minutes tick by. The figure keeps beckoning, that awful smile fixed on its face. I can't look away. The screen suddenly goes black. When it comes back on a second later, the figure is gone. But something is different. The camera angle has changed slightly, tilted down toward the front door. My phone buzzes again, another motion alert, but this time it's from the doorbell camera. The figure is standing on my porch. I can see it clearly now, tall, thin, wearing what looks like a black suit. Its skin is pale, almost glowing in the infrared light. That smile is impossibly wide. It raises its hand again, but this time it doesn't beckon. Instead, it reaches toward the doorbell. I hear it chime downstairs. Sarah stirs beside me. "Who's that?" she mumbles sleepily. My throat is too dry to answer. The doorbell chimes again. "Can you see who it is?" Sarah asks, sitting up. I try to tell her no, to be quiet, to go back to sleep. But before I can get the words out, I hear the sound of our front door opening. We never leave it unlocked. I know we never leave it unlocked. I checked it myself just hours ago. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Sarah is fully awake now. "Is someone in the house?" she whispers, clutching my arm. I can't answer, can't move, can't breathe. The footsteps reach our hallway. Stop outside our bedroom door. My phone buzzes one final time, a new motion alert. The figure is no longer on the porch. The bedroom door begins to open. The first letter fell out of a cardboard box when I was clearing the attic of my newly rented house in Burlington, Vermont. It hit the wooden floorboards with a soft tap, landing face up. My name was written on the envelope in neat black handwriting, to James Wheeler. I picked it up. The paper felt old and brittle between my fingers. The postmark showed a date from 1992, exactly 30 years ago. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The first line made my hands shake. "Dear James, by the time you read this in 2022, you'll have just moved into 47 Maple Street after your divorce from Sarah." I sat down hard on a dusty wooden chest. Sarah and I had finalized our divorce 3 months ago. I'd only signed the lease on this house last week. Nobody could have known I'd be here. The letter continued. "You're probably sitting on the old chest right now, trying to make sense of this. Don't worry. There are more letters. Each one will explain something about your life that I shouldn't be able to know. I wrote these decades ago, but they're all for you, James. For right now. For today. My throat felt dry. I dug through the box where I'd found the first letter. There were 12 more envelopes, each addressed to me, each postmarked from different dates in the past. I spread them out on the attic floor, dust swirling in the weak light from the single window. The second letter was postmarked 1995. Inside, it described my college years at UVM, including details nobody else could know. Like the night I snuck onto the roof of Williams Hall with Jenny Parker and almost got caught by campus security. I'd never told anyone about that. My hands trembled as I opened the third letter from 1998. It described my first job at Burlington Software, including the exact words my boss said when he hired me. "You seem like a straight shooter, James. We need more of those around here." I'd forgotten that line until reading it now. The fourth letter knew about the camping trip where I met Sarah. It described the red tent I borrowed from my cousin, the thunderstorm that forced us to huddle together for warmth, even the stupid joke I told about bears that made her laugh despite being soaking wet and cold. Letter after letter contained impossible knowledge of my life. My promotion in 2008. The day I found out Sarah was pregnant, and the miscarriage 3 months later that nearly broke us. The slow drift apart over the next decade. The final fight about the dishes that wasn't really about dishes at all. I checked the handwriting against samples from my parents, siblings, friends. No matches. I called the post office about the postmarks. They were real. These letters had actually been processed and delivered decades ago, somehow waiting here for me to find them. The ninth letter described what I was wearing right now. Faded jeans and my old Red Sox t-shirt with the coffee stain on the sleeve. It knew I'd skipped breakfast this morning. Knew I'd been sitting in this attic for 2 hours now, reading. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. "Hey, you okay? Been trying to call." The 10th letter. "You just got a text from Claire. You won't answer it yet because you're too absorbed in these letters. She's worried because you missed lunch with her and the kids." Shit. I had forgotten about lunch with my nieces. I checked the time. 2:47 p.m. Letter 11. "It's 2:47 p.m. You just realized you stood Claire up for lunch. Don't worry. She'll understand when you explain." But you won't explain, will you? How could you tell anyone about finding these letters? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the 12th letter. This one was different. Just a single sentence. "The final letter is hidden behind the loose brick in the chimney, but you might not want to read it yet." I stared at the old brick chimney running up through one corner of the attic. One brick near eye level was slightly discolored. When I pressed it, it moved. Behind it was a small cavity containing one last envelope. This letter was postmarked yesterday. I sat holding it for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light. The other letters lay scattered around me like fallen leaves, each one an impossible glimpse into my past. But this one would be different. This one would tell me something about my future. My phone buzzed again. "Claire. Seriously, James, call me." I slipped the final letter into my pocket without opening it. Some knowledge feels too dangerous to have. I gathered the other letters and put them back in their box, then carried it down to my car. I drove to the lake and sat watching the water until sunset. That night I burned all the letters except the last one. I watched them curl and blacken in my fireplace, taking their impossible knowledge with them. The final letter I sealed in a new envelope and buried in the backyard under the big maple tree. 5 years have passed. The letter is still there, waiting. Sometimes on sleepless nights I stand at my bedroom window and look down at that spot under the tree. Sometimes I think about digging it up, but I never do. Last week I found another letter in my mailbox. No postmark, no return address. Just my name in that same neat handwriting. Inside was a single line. "Smart choice, not reading the last one. But you'll need to dig it up on March 15th, trust me." March 15th is tomorrow. I'm writing this all down now because I need someone to know what happened, even if I never show it to anyone. The original letters are ashes now, but their words are burned into my memory. Each one knew things about my life that no one could have known. Each one was waiting for me in that attic, some for decades, perfectly preserved until the moment I found them. Who wrote them? How did they know? These questions keep me awake at night. I've spent countless hours researching time travel theories, investigating the house's previous owners, even consulting physics professors at UVM. No answers make sense. The only person who might be able to explain is whoever wrote that last letter, the one still buried under my maple tree. In less than 24 hours, I'm supposed to dig it up. Will I do it? The rational part of my brain says no. Leave the past and the future buried where they belong. But another part of me needs to know. That part remembers the precision of those other letters, the weight of their impossible knowledge. My shovel is leaning against the back porch. The forecast calls for rain tomorrow. My hands are already shaking when I think about breaking that soil, about opening that muddy envelope. The hardest part is knowing that somewhere out there, someone already knows what I'll choose. They knew 30 years ago when they wrote these letters. They knew 5 years ago when they watched me bury that last envelope. They know now as I sit here writing this. They know what happens next. Maybe you do too. Maybe you're reading this years from now, already knowing how this story ends. Maybe you're me, looking back on this moment, remembering the choice I'm about to make. If you are, if I am, then you know why I'm reaching for that shovel now. You know why I'm walking out to the maple tree in the dark. You know why I can't wait until morning. The soil is soft from yesterday's rain. The shovel cuts deep. 3 feet down, my fingers touch something hard. Not the envelope, but a small metal box. Inside is another letter dated tomorrow. I knew you wouldn't wait until morning. The real final letter is in your bedroom. It always has been. Look behind the mirror. I'm there now. The mirror is heavy, mounted firmly to the wall. But when I run my fingers along the edges, I feel something. A seam that shouldn't be there. A hidden compartment. Inside is an envelope. The paper is crisp and new. No postmark. Just my name in handwriting I finally recognize. It's mine. I'm holding it now. This letter I apparently wrote to myself. The room is dark except for my desk lamp. Outside, the maple tree stands silent, its branches throwing shadows on my half-dug hole in the yard. Do I open it? Do I want to know what I needed to tell myself so badly that I engineered this decades-long mystery? What could be so important that it required such an elaborate plan? The envelope feels light, just one page inside. My hands aren't shaking anymore. Sometimes knowledge feels too dangerous to have, but sometimes not knowing is even more dangerous. I'm breaking the seal now. The letter contains 10 words. Don't read this letter. Writing it was enough. You understand now. And I do. I understand everything. The letters were never about their content. They were about proving something was possible. They were a message to myself encoded in the very fact of their existence. I take out a fresh sheet of paper. My hand moves across it, writing the words I remember reading 30 years ago in that first letter I found in the attic. Dear James, by the time you read this in 2022, I have a lot of letters to write, and a very specific set of dates to mail them on, and a house on Maple Street to make sure stays empty until exactly the right moment. The hardest part will be waiting. But I already know I succeed. After all, I remember reading these letters. Time isn't what we think it is. Neither is cause and effect. Neither is memory. I fold the first letter carefully and seal it in an envelope. Tomorrow I'll mail it, postmarked 1992. Then I'll write the next one and the next. 12 letters in total, plus the fake final letter to bury under the maple tree, plus the one behind the mirror. Everything has to be perfect. Everything has to happen exactly as I remember it happening. Because somewhere out there I'm about to rent a house on Maple Street. Somewhere out there I'm about to find a letter with my name on it. And I need to make sure I find it. I should have trusted my gut that night. The details are burned into my brain now. October 15th, 2:47 a.m. according to the green numbers glowing on my dashboard. I was driving back from a late client meeting in Springfield, taking the back roads to avoid highway construction. My gas gauge had been hovering near empty for the last 20 minutes. The Shell station appeared like a floating island of fluorescent light in the darkness. No other cars in sight. Just endless fields of corn stubble stretching into blackness on both sides of the road. The pump's digital display flickered as I pulled up, numbers resetting to 0. I got out, swiped my card, and started pumping. The cold made my breath visible in small clouds. That's when I heard footsteps on the cracked concrete behind me. "Evening," a man's voice said. I turned. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a dark green canvas jacket and jeans. Something seemed off about his face, but in the harsh overhead lights I couldn't quite tell what it was. He kept his head slightly down, hands in his pockets. "Any chance you're heading toward Millbrook?" he asked. His voice had an odd flatness to it. My car broke down a few miles back. My destination was actually Millbrook, but something in my gut screamed danger. "Sorry," I lied. "I'm going the other direction, toward Riverside." He didn't respond right away. Just stood there, perfectly still. Then he nodded once and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the station's light. The pump clicked off at $47.32. I hung it up quickly, got back in my car, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking slightly as I turned the key. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong about that encounter. The road stretched empty ahead of me as I drove. The yellow center line flickered past hypnotically in my headlights. I was about 15 minutes from the gas station when I saw something ahead that made my blood run cold. A figure was standing in the middle of my lane. I hit the brakes instinctively, slowing from 65 to about 40. As I got closer, I recognized the green canvas jacket. It was impossible. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I hadn't passed any cars, and even if someone had picked him up, they would have had to pass me to drop him off here. I slowed to 25, heart pounding. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing my approaching car. I could veer around him, but something made me slow almost to a stop about 30 feet away. That's when he raised his head and looked directly at me through my windshield. Where his eyes should have been, there were just black spheres, not empty sockets. They protruded slightly, like polished obsidian balls had been pushed into his eye sockets. The skin around them was pale gray, traced with dark veins. His mouth hung slightly open, revealing teeth that were too long and sharp to be human. My foot slammed the gas pedal before my brain could even process what I was seeing. The engine roared and my tires spun on the asphalt. In my rearview mirror, I saw him turn to track my car's movement, those black spheres reflecting my taillights like a cat's eyes. I drove way too fast, taking curves at dangerous speeds. My hands were clenched so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles hurt. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see him somehow behind me or in my back seat. After about 5 minutes of blind panic, I forced myself to slow down. I needed to think clearly. I pulled over and grabbed my phone. No signal, typical for these back roads. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. That's when I heard tapping on my passenger window. He was standing there, right outside my car. Those black spheres stared in at me. His mouth stretched into something that might have been trying to be a smile, but looked more like a wound opening. His teeth gleamed wetly. I screamed and floored it again, swerving onto the road. In my mirror, I saw him standing in the spot where my car had been, watching me drive away. The next curve came up too fast. I felt my tires losing grip. The world spun as my car left the road. There was a horrible crunching sound. The airbag exploded in my face and everything went black. I woke up to flashing lights and voices. My car was wrapped around a tree about 20 feet off the road. According to the paramedics, a passing truck driver had seen my taillights in the field and called it in. They said I was lucky, just a mild concussion and some bruised ribs. The police asked what had made me drive off the road. I told them about the man at the gas station and seeing him on the road later. They took notes and said they'd check it out, but I could tell they thought I was either drunk or had fallen asleep at the wheel. The next day, I went back to that Shell station with a police officer. The attendant working the night before said no one matching that description had been there. They checked the security cameras. The footage showed me pulling up, pumping gas, and driving away. No sign of anyone approaching me or any other people at all. But I know what I saw. Sometimes I still dream about those black spheres staring in at me through my car window. I don't drive those back roads at night anymore. I don't stop at rural gas stations after dark, and I never ever pick up hitchhikers. Last week I was in a convenience store in town and saw a missing persons flyer. The photo showed a man in his mid-30s, last seen 3 months ago walking along Highway 43 at night after his car broke down. He was wearing a green canvas jacket. I stared at that photo for a long time. The man in it had normal brown eyes. I wonder how many other drivers have seen him standing in the road at night, those eyes now replaced with black spheres. I wonder how many have stopped to help him. Sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I think about what might have happened if I'd given him a ride from that gas station. I still drive past that stretch of road sometimes during the day. There's a new mile marker there now, mile marker 43. Sometimes I slow down as I pass it, and I swear I can see something moving in the cornfields. Something tall, wearing a green canvas jacket. But I never stop to look closer, and I never drive that road at night. The police never found any trace of the man in the missing persons photo. The case is still open. Sometimes I think about going to them, telling them everything I saw, but I know how it would sound, and part of me is afraid that if I start talking about it, I'll see him again. Not just in my nightmares, but standing outside my house at night, those black spheres staring in through my windows. So I keep quiet. I take the highway now, even when there's construction. I keep my gas tank full. And every time I pass mile marker 43, I press the accelerator a little harder and don't look at the cornfields. But I know he's out there, standing in the dark, waiting for someone else to stop at that gas station late at night. Someone who might be kind enough to offer a ride to a stranger. If you're ever driving those back roads at night and you see a man in a green canvas jacket asking for help, don't stop, don't slow down, and whatever you do, don't look at his eyes, because once you see those black spheres, you'll never forget them, and I'm not sure he'll let you see them twice. The missing persons flyer is still up in that convenience store. Every time I see it, I think about taking it down, but I leave it there as a warning, even though nobody else will understand. The photo shows a normal man with normal eyes smiling at the camera. But I know what he looks like now. And sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder, how many other missing persons posters show people who are still out there, walking the dark roads with black spheres where their eyes used to be. I don't drive at night anymore if I can help it. But if you do, watch out for mile marker 43. And if you see someone standing in the road wearing a green canvas jacket, don't stop. Just drive. Drive as fast as you can. And pray he doesn't appear at your window. Because I'm starting to think that whatever is wearing that green canvas jacket now isn't the man from the missing persons poster anymore. And I don't want to find out what it really is. The police closed their investigation last month, filed it away with all the other unsolved disappearances. But I know he's still out there, standing in the dark, waiting. And those black spheres are watching, always watching. I should have known something was wrong when I saw no other cars in the parking lot. But after 14 hours on the road, my mind wasn't working right. I just needed food, coffee, and a break from the endless highway stretching between Phoenix and Dallas. The neon sign buzzed above the small roadside diner, casting a red glow across my windshield. Mary's Place, open 24 HRS, it proclaimed in flickering letters. The building sat alone on that empty stretch of desert highway, a single-story rectangle of tan concrete with large windows running along the front. I pulled my Toyota Camry into the gravel lot at 3:47 a.m. The crunch of tires on loose stone seemed too loud in the dead silence of the night. No crickets chirped, no wind blew, just the quiet hum of my engine before I turned the key and killed it. My legs cramped as I stepped out of the car. The air felt thick and stagnant, like breathing through a wet cloth. Sweat immediately beaded on my forehead despite the late hour. Summer nights in New Mexico didn't offer much relief from the heat. A bell jingled as I pushed open the glass door. Cold air conditioning hit my face, a welcome change from the muggy night outside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and bright after hours of darkness. The diner looked like dozens of others I'd stopped at over the years. Red vinyl booths along the windows, a counter with chrome stools, laminated menus tucked behind metal napkin holders. Everything clean, but worn around the edges. The kind of place that had probably looked exactly the same for the past 30 years. Sit anywhere you like, hon. The waitress appeared from the kitchen, coffee pot in hand. She looked to be in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a loose bun and tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read, Helen. I slid into a booth by the window, my clothes sticking to the vinyl. Helen set a menu in front of me and filled a white ceramic mug with coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. Rough night for driving, she said, though her tone was more statement than conversation starter. Yeah, long haul from Phoenix. Still got a ways to go to Dallas. I wrapped my hands around the hot mug, letting it warm my air-conditioned fingers. She nodded, then stood waiting with her order pad. I hadn't even opened the menu, but suddenly realized I was starving. Burger and fries? I asked. It seemed safe. Hard to mess up diner standards. Good choice. Cook makes them fresh. She scribbled on her pad and headed back to the kitchen without another word. I sipped the coffee and stared out the window at my car, the only vehicle in sight. The highway stretched empty in both directions, disappearing into darkness. The coffee tasted bitter, but did its job, clearing some of the road fog from my head. The silence started to get to me. No music played, no dishes clattered in the kitchen. Even Helen's footsteps seemed muffled as she moved around behind the counter. I couldn't shake the feeling that something felt off, but chalked it up to exhaustion and too many hours alone on the road. My food arrived quickly, almost too quickly for a fresh-cooked burger. But it looked good. Thick patty on a toasted bun, crispy fries piled high beside it. Helen refilled my coffee without asking and disappeared again. The first bite of burger surprised me. It was perfect. Juicy, seasoned just right, with fresh lettuce and tomato. The fries were hot and crispy, exactly how I liked them. I hadn't expected food this good from a middle-of-nowhere diner at 4 a.m. I ate quickly, hunger overriding any desire to savor the meal. The whole time, that nagging feeling of wrongness grew stronger. Why was I the only customer? Where were the truckers that usually filled these kinds of places in the dead of night? Why didn't I hear any kitchen sounds while they cooked my food? Helen appeared with the check just as I finished the last fry. $12.75, she said, setting the slip of paper on the table. I pulled out my wallet and handed her a 20. Keep the change. This was great. I'm going to have to remember to stop here whenever I make this drive. She paused, hand halfway to taking the bill. A strange expression crossed her face. Not quite sad, not quite worried. We might not be here when you come back through. The way she said it sent a chill down my spine despite the warm food in my stomach. What do you mean, are you closing down? Something like that. She took the money and walked away before I could ask anything else. I sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of her words and that weird look on her face. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead just once, but enough to make me decide it was time to go. Thanks again, I called out as I headed for the door. No response came. I glanced back but didn't see Helen anywhere. The bell jingled as I stepped outside. The heat hit me like a wall, but something else felt different. The air seemed thicker, heavier. My car sat alone in the gravel lot, but now it looked wrong somehow, too new against the weathered building behind it. I drove away quickly, watching the diner's neon sign fade in my rearview mirror, until darkness swallowed it completely. A week later, I made the return trip from Dallas. The drive felt longer, though maybe that was just my anticipation about stopping at Mary's place again. Something about Helen's words kept nagging at me. I wanted to prove to myself that I was being ridiculous, that it was just a normal diner, and I'd just been too tired to see it clearly. I timed my drive to hit that stretch of highway around the same time, just before 4 a.m. The night felt different, cooler, with a breeze stirring up dust devils along the roadside. I watched the mile markers tick by, knowing I was getting close. The diner should have appeared around the next bend. I slowed down, not wanting to miss it in the dark. But when my headlights swept across the spot where it should have been, my blood ran cold. I hit the brakes hard enough to smell burning rubber. My car skidded to a stop on the shoulder, throwing up gravel. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, staring at what remained of Mary's place. The building stood dark and empty, a hollow shell against the star-filled sky. Boards covered the windows. The neon sign hung broken and rust-stained, letters long dark. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete pad where I'd parked just a week ago. This wasn't a recently closed business. This was a place that had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. I got out of the car, legs shaking. The beam of my flashlight revealed more details I didn't want to see. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Desert plants grew through the gravel lot, now more dirt than stone. The paint had faded and peeled until the walls were barely more than bare concrete. Moving slowly, I approached the building. Part of me screamed to get back in the car and drive away fast, but I had to know. I peered through a gap in the boards covering the windows. The flashlight beam showed empty space where the counter and booths should have been. Only outline shapes in the dust suggested where they once stood. A thick layer of dirt covered everything. No footprints marked the floor except those left by small animals. My heart pounded as I moved to the door. It took some effort, but I managed to pull it open enough to slip inside. The bell was gone, leaving only rusty screws in the frame above. The smell hit me first. Dust and decay and years of abandonment. My flashlight revealed walls stripped to bare sheetrock, wires hanging where lights once hung. The kitchen entrance gaped black and empty, the swinging door long gone. I found myself walking to the booth where I'd sat a week ago. The vinyl seats, the laminated menu, the white coffee mug, all gone. Nothing remained but an empty corner and my footprints in the dust. My phone showed 3:47 a.m., the exact time I'd pulled in last week. The air felt thick and stagnant, just like that night. But now I understood why. I ran. Back through the hanging door, across the weed-choked lot, into my car. The engine roared to life, and I accelerated hard onto the highway, gravel spraying behind me. Only when the ruins disappeared in my mirror did I let myself breathe normally again. The rest of the drive passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about that perfect burger, the fresh coffee, Helen's tired eyes behind her glasses. Had any of it been real? The food had been hot and solid in my stomach. The coffee had cleared my head. I still had the receipt in my wallet. I pulled it out at the next gas station. The paper felt real between my fingers, but the text had faded to near invisibility. Only the date remained clear. Exactly 1 week ago. The rest looked like it had aged years in just 7 days. I've made that drive between Phoenix and Dallas dozens of times since then. I always slow down at that stretch of highway, though I'm not sure why. The ruins are gone now, replaced by empty desert scrubland. Sometimes in the dark, I think I see a flicker of neon in the distance, but it's never there when I get closer. I've searched newspaper archives and local history records trying to find any mention of Mary's place or what happened there. The closest I've come is a brief article from 1987 about a diner that burned down in that area. The only fatalities were the night cook and a waitress named Helen Martin. I still have that receipt. The paper has gone yellow and brittle, but I keep it in my wallet. Sometimes I take it out and run my fingers over the faded text, wondering if I imagined the whole thing. But then I remember the taste of that burger, the smell of the coffee, and Helen's strange words. "We might not be here when you come back through." She was right. They weren't there when I came back. Maybe they hadn't been there for a very long time. These days I don't stop at isolated diners in the middle of the night anymore. I pack snacks and thermoses of coffee for long drives. And if I do have to stop somewhere after dark, I make sure there are other cars in the parking lot, other customers inside, signs of life and movement in the normal flow of time. Because sometimes, in the dead hours of the night, places can exist that shouldn't. Sometimes the line between what's real and what's gone gets thin enough to cross. And sometimes, if you're not careful, you might find yourself being served the best burger of your life by someone who died 30 years ago. I don't know if Helen and the cook know they're dead. I don't know if that diner exists in some kind of loop, serving endless meals to tired travelers who happen to stop at just the right or wrong moment. I don't know if I actually experienced what I think I did, or if 14 hours of driving just broke my brain for a while. But I do know this. If you're driving alone late at night and you see a diner standing alone in the darkness, check the parking lot first. If yours would be the only car there, keep driving. The coffee might be good, the burger might be perfect, but some meals come with a side of questions you don't want answered. And if you do stop, and everything seems just a little too quiet, pay attention to what the waitress says when you leave. She might be trying to tell you something important about the nature of where and when you really are. I haven't driven that stretch of highway at night since my last visit to the ruins. These days I time my trips to pass through there in broad daylight. But sometimes when I'm driving late on other roads and I see a lonely diner's neon cutting through the darkness, I wonder about Helen and that perfect burger and the receipt that aged 30 years in a week. And I keep driving. I found the watch at Sal's Antiques on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It was sitting in a glass case among other vintage timepieces, but something about this one caught my eye. The leather band was worn but well preserved, and the silver case had that perfect patina that only comes from decades of wear. The face was simple, Roman numerals, delicate hands, and a small window showing the date. The price tag read $75, which seemed reasonable for a piece that looked like it was from the 1950s. "Nice choice," Sal said when I pointed to it. "Swiss made. Previous owner brought it in last month, said it kept perfect time." He unlocked the case and handed it to me. The weight felt good in my hand, substantial but not heavy. When I turned it over, I saw an inscription, "Time reveals all, 1952. I bought it without hesitation. I'd been looking for a vintage watch for a while, something different from all the smartwatches and digital displays everyone wore these days. This one had character. The first few days were perfectly normal. The watch kept excellent time, and I got several compliments at work. I liked the soft ticking sound it made, not loud enough to be annoying, just enough to remind me it was there. I even started taking off my Apple Watch, preferring the classic look of my new purchase. Then, exactly 1 week after I bought it, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find the watch had stopped. The hands were frozen at 2 hours exactly. I figured the spring needed winding, so I adjusted the crown and set it to the correct time. No big deal. But the next night, the same thing happened. 2 a.m. stopped dead. This time I was awake when it happened. I'd been working late on a project. I actually heard the ticking stop. I wound it again, slightly annoyed but not too concerned. Old watches can be temperamental. The third night I decided to stay up and watch it, curious about this pattern. As the hands approached 2 a.m., I stared at the face. The second hand moved smoothly, tick, 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 until exactly 2 kg and then nothing. Complete stillness. That's when I heard the TV turn on downstairs. I live alone in a 2-story house. The TV was definitely off when I went upstairs. I distinctly remembered turning it off because I'd been watching Netflix earlier. Now I could hear the unmistakable sound of static coming from my living room. My first thought was burglars. I grabbed my phone and the baseball bat I keep under my bed, then crept to the top of the stairs. The blue glow of the TV screen lit up the living room, casting weird shadows on the walls. But there was nobody there, just static on the screen, that harsh white noise hiss filling the room. I went downstairs, checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked. The remote was exactly where I'd left it on the coffee table. I turned off the TV, double-checked all the locks again, and went back upstairs. My heart was pounding, but I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe there was a power surge that triggered the TV's auto-on function, if that was even a thing. I looked at the watch, still frozen at 2 hours. I wound it again and set the correct time, which was now 2:15 a.m. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from directly above my bedroom. Clear, deliberate steps moving across the attic floor. The thing is, my attic is filled with boxes and old furniture. There's barely room to stand up there, let alone walk around. And the only access is through a pull-down ladder in the hallway, which was still firmly closed. The footsteps moved slowly from one end of the attic to the other, each step accompanied by a low creak of floorboards. I stood frozen in my bedroom, baseball bat clutched in my sweating hands, as the steps moved back and forth, back and forth. At exactly 2:30 a.m., they stopped, just like that. The watch started ticking again, as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day at work, I could barely focus. I kept looking at the watch, dreading what would happen that night. I thought about not wearing it, but something told me that wouldn't make a difference. This wasn't about the watch itself, it was just marking time for whatever was happening in my house. I decided to document everything. I set up my phone to record the living room and positioned my laptop to record the hallway. Then I sat in my bedroom watching the watch as midnight came and went. 1:45 a.m. The ticking seemed louder somehow. Each movement of the second hand felt heavy, significant. 1:55 a.m. My mouth was dry. The bat was next to me on the bed. 1:59 a.m. I could feel my pulse in my throat. 2 a.m. The ticking stopped. Right on cue, I heard the TV. But this time there was something else. A voice coming through the static. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely speaking. The sound made my skin crawl. I checked my phone's live feed. The TV was on, showing static, but something dark moved across the screen. Not a person, more like a shadow, but three-dimensional. It shifted and flowed like smoke, but seemed to have mass. The footsteps started in the attic, but they were different this time. Faster, more aggressive. The whole ceiling seemed to shake with each step. Then I heard another sound, dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. My phone's screen went black. The laptop feed followed a second later. The temperature in my bedroom dropped so fast I could see my breath. The footsteps moved to the stairs. Not the attic stairs, the main stairs leading up to the second floor. Each step creaked under invisible weight. Thud, creak, thud, creak. Getting closer. I sat paralyzed on my bed, gripping the baseball bat so hard my knuckles were white. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They moved down the hallway, steady and deliberate, getting closer to my bedroom. They stopped right outside my door. The handle started to turn. I wanted to scream, but couldn't make a sound. The door opened slowly, the hinges groaning. The hallway was pitch black, but the darkness in the doorway seemed different, deeper, almost solid. The temperature dropped even further. The shadow moved into my room. It had no definite shape, but I could feel it looking at me. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe underwater. My chest tightened. The shadow drifted closer. I swung the bat. It passed right through the darkness, but the shadow recoiled. The temperature rose a few degrees. Encouraged, I swung again, shouting wordlessly. The shadow retreated to the doorway. Then I heard a voice, not from the TV this time, but right there in my room. It was barely a whisper, but I heard it clearly. Not yet. The shadow disappeared. The TV turned off downstairs. The temperature returned to normal. I looked at the watch. 2:30 a.m. exactly. It started ticking again. I spent the next day researching the watch. I went back to Sal's Antiques, but Sal claimed he couldn't remember who sold it to him. I searched online for similar models, for stories about haunted watches, for anything that might explain what was happening. Finally, buried in a local history forum, I found something. A post from 3 years ago mentioned a Charles Weathers who died in 1952, the year inscribed on my watch. He had been a watchmaker in town, known for his custom pieces. According to the Post, he died in his sleep at 2:30 a.m. after a break-in at his shop. Nothing was stolen except one watch he'd just finished making. The next part made my blood run cold. Weathers had been working on a special commission, a watch that would help the owner see beyond the veil at the hour of his death. The client was never identified. I thought about throwing the watch away, but something told me that wouldn't solve the problem. Whatever was happening, the watch was just a conduit. It was marking time for something that was already there, waiting. That night I was ready. I'd drawn crosses on all the doors and windows with blessed chalk from a local church. Salt lines crossed every threshold. I had every light in the house on and religious symbols from half a dozen faiths scattered around my room. 2 a.m. came. The watch stopped. Nothing happened. No TV, no footsteps, no temperature drop. For a moment I thought it was over. Then I heard something new. The sound of gears turning, lots of them, like being inside a massive clock. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls vibrated with it. Pictures fell from the walls. The salt lines rippled as if in a wind that I couldn't feel. The shadow appeared in the center of my room, bypassing all my defenses. But this time it had a shape, the vague outline of a man in old-fashioned clothes. As I watched, frozen, it became more defined. I could make out features. A lined face, wire-rimmed glasses, a watchmaker's loop in one eye. Charles Weathers looked exactly like his picture in the forum post. He smiled at me. Not a threatening smile. It was almost sad. "You found it," he said. His voice sounded like gears grinding together. "I've been waiting for someone to find it." "The watch?" I managed to ask. He nodded. "My last piece. My masterpiece. Do you know what time really is?" I shook my head. "Time is a door," he said, "and at certain moments it opens. 2 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. That's when the gears of reality grind the slowest. When the space between ticks is wide enough to slip through. What do you want?" "Want?" He seemed surprised by the question. "I don't want anything. The watch does what it was made to do. It shows what's always there, just hidden behind the seconds and minutes. The things that live in the spaces between moments." The grinding sound got louder. Weathers looked at my watch. "Almost time," he said. "For what?" "For you to choose. Keep wearing the watch, and you'll learn to see more, or give it back and return to your safe, solid time." "Give it back to who?" "To me, of course." He held out his hand. The grinding was so loud now I could barely hear myself think. I looked at the watch. It was still frozen at 2 so, but somehow I knew exactly how much time I had left to decide. The second hand trembled slightly, like it was fighting to move. I thought about the past few nights, the terror and confusion, but I also thought about what Weathers had said, about seeing what was hidden behind the moments, about the spaces between ticks where impossible things lived. The grinding reached a crescendo. My ears popped. Weathers waited patiently, hand extended. I made my choice. I kept the watch. Weathers smiled again, wider this time. "Welcome to real time," he said, and vanished. The watch started ticking again. 2:30 a.m. That was 6 months ago. The TV still turns on every night at 2 a.m. The footsteps still cross my attic. The shadow, Weathers, still visits. But I'm not afraid anymore. He was right about the spaces between moments. I've learned to see things in those 30 minutes that I never imagined could exist. Sometimes, on particularly quiet nights, I sit in my living room and watch the static on the TV. Voices come through sometimes, speaking in languages that don't exist at any other hour. Shapes move through my house, going about business I can't comprehend. The watch stops, but time, real time, flows strangely in those moments. I've started taking notes, drawing sketches of what I see, writing down the impossible words I hear. Weathers appears sometimes to look over my shoulder, nodding approvingly. The watch still sits on my wrist, marking time as it always has. But now I know that time isn't what we think it is. It's not a straight line or even a circle. It's more like a gear, full of teeth and spaces, gaps where something else can slip through. And every night at 2 a.m. for 30 minutes, I get to see what lives in those gaps. The watch stops, but everything else comes alive. I check the time as I write this. 1:59 a.m. The second hand moves steadily toward the top of the dial. I can already feel the air getting heavier, the space between ticks stretching out like taffy. Time for another night of real time. Tick, tick, stop. I never should have answered that phone. The ancient rotary model sat quietly in my basement for weeks after I moved in, just gathering dust on a shelf. I ignored it completely until that night in October when it actually rang. That single decision, to pick up that receiver, changed everything. The previous owners left the phone behind when they moved out, along with other junk they didn't want to deal with. I didn't mind. Moving into this old house in rural Massachusetts was already expensive enough, and clearing out their abandoned stuff wasn't high on my priority list. I had more pressing issues to handle, like fixing the perpetually dripping kitchen faucet and repainting the peeling walls in the living room. I work from home as a software developer, so I spend most of my time upstairs in my makeshift office. The basement was just storage space as far as I was concerned. I only went down there occasionally to do laundry or grab tools. The phone sat on a wooden shelf next to some rusty garden implements and moldy cardboard boxes. It was one of those heavy black desk models from the 1950s or 60s, with a rotary dial and a thick coiled cord. The previous owners must have used it as a basement extension line back in the day. I assumed it was just decorative now. Surely the line had been disconnected decades ago. The modern phone jacks were all upstairs and I had my cell phone anyway. So I barely gave that old rotary phone a second glance during my first 2 months in the house. Then came that night in late October. I was working late, trying to fix some buggy code before a client meeting the next morning. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows and sending dead leaves skittering across the front porch. Around 11:30 p.m. I heard it, a loud mechanical ring echoing up from the basement. At first I thought I was imagining things. I took off my headphones and listened. There it was again, that distinctive old-fashioned telephone ring, slightly muffled but unmistakable. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at my dark office doorway as the ringing continued. "This is impossible," I muttered to myself. "That line's been dead for years." The ringing persisted, mechanical and insistent. After the fifth ring, I got up from my desk and walked to the basement door. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. Something about this felt wrong, but my rational mind kicked in. Probably just some weird electrical issue causing the old ringer to malfunction. I should check it out before it kept me up all night. I flipped on the basement lights and walked down the creaking wooden stairs. The ringing grew louder with each step. When I reached the concrete floor, I could see the black phone on its shelf, exactly where it had been sitting untouched for months. The ring was definitely coming from it. I approached slowly, watching the phone like it might suddenly sprout legs and scuttle away. The dust on the shelf around it was undisturbed. The coiled cord hung limply down the side. Ring after ring continued to echo off the stone foundation walls. "This is crazy," I said aloud, trying to steady my nerves with the sound of my own voice. "It's not even connected to anything." I reached for the receiver, hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. The ringing stopped immediately. I held the heavy black handset to my ear. "Hello?" There was no dial tone, no static, no automated message. Just silence at first. Then I heard it, the sound of someone breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths, clearly audible through the receiver. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shakier than I intended. The breathing continued, steady and unchanging. In, out, in, out. "Look, I don't know how you're doing this, but it's not funny. This line isn't even connected." No response except those measured breaths. They weren't labored or threatening, just calm, regular breathing, like someone sleeping. But whoever it was had to be deliberately holding the phone close enough for me to hear it so clearly. I slammed the receiver back into its cradle. My hands were trembling slightly. I backed away from the shelf, keeping my eyes on the phone. It sat there innocently, just an old piece of obsolete technology. I practically ran up the basement stairs, slamming the door behind me. Back in my office, I tried to focus on work again, but I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing at the basement door, half expecting to hear that ring again. Nothing happened for the rest of the night. Around 2 a.m., I finally gave up on work and went to bed. I lay awake for hours, straining to hear any sound from downstairs. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. Sleep deprivation and too much coffee playing tricks on my mind. Still, I avoided the basement for the next few days. By Friday, I had almost put the incident out of my mind. I needed to do laundry, so I forced myself to go down to the basement in the middle of the afternoon. Bright sunlight streamed through the small ground-level windows. The phone sat exactly as it always had, covered in dust. Out of curiosity, I picked up the receiver and held it to my ear. Complete silence, not even the hum of a dial tone. I set it back down and examined the phone more closely. The cord disappeared behind the shelf, but when I pulled it out, I could see it had been cut off about 6 inches from where it entered the phone base. This thing wasn't connected to anything. I seriously considered throwing it away right then. But something stopped me. Maybe just my natural tendency to procrastinate on household chores. I left it there and went about my laundry. That night it rang again. Same time, 11:30 p.m. exactly. I was in bed reading when I heard it start. The ring sounded different from upstairs. Hollower, more distant, but still clearly audible through the floor. I put down my book and sat perfectly still, listening. Ring after ring echoed up from below. My heart was pounding in my chest. This time I knew I wasn't imagining it. The logical part of my brain started running through explanations. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. But how? The phone wasn't connected to anything. Could it be picking up interference from something else? But what could make an old rotary phone ring without power? The ringing continued, demanding an answer. I got out of bed and walked downstairs to my office. Through the basement door, I could hear it more clearly now. I stood there for several minutes debating what to do. Finally, I opened the door. The basement lights were off, and the ringing seemed to echo up the dark stairwell. I flipped the switch and walked down, my bare feet cold on the wooden steps. The phone looked exactly the same as always. I approached it slowly, watching the dust motes dance in the air around it, stirred up by my movement. The ringing stopped as soon as my hand touched the receiver. I lifted it to my ear, my mouth dry. Hello? The breathing started immediately. Slow, steady breaths, perfectly regular. In, out, in, out. This time, I forced myself to listen more carefully. The sound had an odd quality to it, not quite natural, almost like it was coming from very far away, or through some kind of filter. "Who are you?" I asked. "What do you want?" The breathing continued unchanged. I stood there listening for several minutes, but nothing changed. Finally, I set the receiver down gently. Back upstairs, I grabbed my phone and called my friend Mike, who works in IT security. It was late, but I knew he'd still be up. "Hey man, weird question. Is there any way someone could hack an old rotary phone to make it ring? Like, remotely?" "What? No, that's not really possible," he said. "Those old phones are completely mechanical. They need a physical connection to the phone line to do anything." "Why?" I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. "Okay, either you're messing with me or someone else is messing with you," he said finally. "There's literally no way that phone could ring without being connected to a line. Physics doesn't work that way. I know how it sounds, but I swear it's happening. Look, want me to come check it out tomorrow? I can bring some equipment, see if there's any weird electromagnetic activity or something." I agreed immediately. Having another person investigate would help prove I wasn't going crazy. Mike came over the next afternoon with a duffel bag full of testing equipment. He examined the phone thoroughly, confirming that it wasn't connected to anything. He tested for electromagnetic fields, radio frequencies, and a bunch of other things I didn't understand. Everything came up normal. "This is just an ordinary old phone," he concluded. "A nice vintage model, actually. Probably worth something to a collector. But it's completely inert. No power, no connection, nothing unusual at all." "So, how do you explain what's happening?" He shrugged. "Bad dreams? Stress hallucinations? Or maybe someone installed some kind of hidden speaker to mess with you. Want me to stay tonight and see if anything happens?" I agreed eagerly. Mike set up his laptop and some monitoring equipment, and we waited. 11:30 p.m. came and went. Nothing happened. "See? Probably just your imagination," Mike said around midnight. He packed up his gear and left. I went to bed frustrated and confused. Was I really just imagining things? But it had seemed so real. The phone stayed silent for the next 3 nights. I was just starting to relax when it happened again. This time it was 3:17 a.m. when the ringing jolted me awake. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. The sound seemed louder than before, more urgent somehow. I got up and walked downstairs, not bothering with lights this time. The ringing guided me through the darkness. When I reached the basement, pale moonlight filtered through the windows, casting strange shadows on the walls. The phone was ringing frantically now, the bell seeming to vibrate through my entire body. I crossed the room quickly and grabbed the receiver. The breathing was different this time, faster, more irregular. I could hear something else in the background, a faint scratching sound like nails on wood. "What do you want?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The breathing quickened further. The scratching grew louder. Then, for the first time, I heard something else. A voice. So quiet I almost missed it. "Help," it whispered. The voice was raspy, desperate. "Please, help." "Who are you? How can I help?" The scratching sound intensified. The breathing turned to gasping. Then the line went dead silent. I held the receiver to my ear for several minutes, willing the voice to return. Nothing but absolute silence. When I finally lowered the phone, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The dust on the shelf around the phone base had been disturbed. There were marks in it, 3 parallel lines like something had dragged fingers through the dust. I backed away from the shelf, my heart pounding. The marks hadn't been there earlier. I was certain of it. As I watched, the moonlight shifted, throwing the scratches into sharp relief. I ran upstairs and locked the basement door. I spent the rest of the night in my office with all the lights on, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. The next morning I called Mike again and told him what happened. He came right over. The marks were still there in the dust. Mike photographed them and measured them carefully. "These are weird," he admitted. "Too regular to be accidental, but I don't see how anyone could have made them without disturbing the rest of the dust. And they're deep, like they were carved into the wood underneath." He helped me remove the phone from the shelf. Sure enough, the marks continued into the wooden surface below. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Mike said. "Want me to take the phone? I can run some more tests on it at my lab." I agreed immediately. Mike wrapped the phone carefully in a towel and took it with him. That should have been the end of it. The phone was gone. Whatever was happening should have stopped. But that night, at exactly 11:30 p.m., I heard it again. The ringing wasn't coming from the basement anymore. It was coming from my bedroom closet. I opened the door slowly. There, sitting on the floor among my shoes, was the phone. The same phone Mike had taken away just hours earlier. It was ringing. I slammed the closet door and ran out of the house. I spent the night at a hotel. The next morning I called Mike in a panic. "The phone's still at my lab," he said. "I'm looking at it right now. It hasn't moved." I went home and checked my closet. The phone was gone. No sign it had ever been there. I'm writing this now because I need to document what's happening while I still can. The phone appears somewhere different in my house every night now. Always at 11:30 p.m. always ringing. Sometimes I answer it, sometimes I don't. When I do, the breathing is always there, sometimes with the voice begging for help, sometimes just scratching sounds. I've tried leaving the house at night. The phone follows me. I heard it ringing in my car's glove compartment last night. When I opened it, the phone was there, somehow crammed into the small space. By morning, it was gone again. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't sleep. I can't work. I jump every time I hear something that sounds remotely like a phone ring. The voice on the line sounds more desperate each time, but I don't know how to help. Last night, something changed. The phone appeared on my nightstand, ringing as usual. When I answered, instead of breathing, I heard the voice clearly for the first time. "Behind you," it said. I spun around. There was nothing there. But when I turned back, the phone was gone. In its place were 3 deep scratches in the wooden nightstand. "I'm selling the house. I don't care about taking a loss. I need to get out of here. But somehow I know the phone will follow me wherever I go. It's not the house that's haunted. It's me." The worst part? It's 11:29 p.m. now. 1 minute until it starts again. I can already feel it coming. The phone is going to ring. And this time, I think I know what I'll see when I turn around. I just hope someone finds this and understands what happened to me. If you ever find an old rotary phone in your house, for God's sake, don't answer it when it rings. Wait. I hear something scratching. It's coming from behind me. I should have taken an Uber that night. That's what keeps running through my head now as I sit here in my bedroom closet, trying to make myself as small as possible while that thing prowls around outside. But I didn't take an Uber. I took the 11:45 p.m. bus home from work like I always do on late shifts because I'm too cheap to spend $20 on a ride when I can spend $2 on the bus. That decision might cost me everything. It started normally enough. I was beat after a 12-hour shift at the warehouse. My back hurt, my feet were killing me, and all I wanted was to get home and crash. The bus stop on 47th Street was empty when I got there, just me under the flickering streetlight. The summer night was sticky hot, making my work shirt cling to my back. When the bus pulled up, I could see through the windows that it was empty. Not unusual for that time of night. I gave the driver a nod as I swiped my card. He didn't respond or look at me, just stared straight ahead through the windshield. I made my way down the aisle, dropped into a seat about halfway back, and leaned my head against the window. We'd gone maybe 3 stops when I felt it. You know that sensation when someone's watching you? The hair on the back of your neck stands up and your skin gets all prickly? That hit me hard. I lifted my head from the window and looked around. There was an old woman sitting in the very back row of the bus. I hadn't seen her get on. She wore a dark dress that looked outdated, like something from the 1950s, and her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun. But what really got me was her face. She was staring right at me, not just glancing, but full-on staring with unblinking eyes. Her skin was pale, almost gray in the dim bus lighting. I quickly looked away, but I could still feel her eyes on me. Maybe she was just some confused old lady who'd gotten on the wrong bus. Maybe she had dementia or something. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through social media without really seeing anything, but every few minutes I'd glance back. She hadn't moved an inch. Same position, same unblinking stare. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. Something was off about the way she sat too. Too straight, too rigid, like a mannequin someone had posed there. I started counting the stops until mine. 6 more. 5 more. The bus seemed to be moving slower than usual, the streets outside unusually empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just dark buildings and pools of orange streetlight. 4 stops. 3. Each time the bus stopped, I tensed up, waiting to hear footsteps coming down the aisle. But there was nothing, just the hiss of the bus doors opening and closing. 2 stops. I risked another look back. The old woman's head had turned slightly, following my position, but the rest of her body hadn't moved at all. Her eyes looked different now, darker, like the pupils had expanded to fill the entire eye. One stop. My heart was pounding. Sweat ran down my back. I grabbed my backpack and stood up, moving to the front of the bus. I couldn't help myself. I looked back one last time. The back row was empty. I froze. The bus hadn't stopped since I'd last looked. There was no way she could have gotten off. I scanned every seat, my breath coming fast and shallow. Nothing. She was just gone. The bus stopped at my corner. I practically ran to the front, almost tripping down the steps. The driver still hadn't moved or spoken. As the doors closed behind me, I could have sworn I saw his reflection in the windshield. His face was gray and corpse-like, eyes completely black. I told myself I was being stupid, letting my imagination run wild because I was tired. But my feet started moving faster anyway, carrying me down the dark street toward my apartment building. The streetlights seemed dimmer than usual, creating more shadows than light. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. They were soft, barely audible, the sound of shoes on concrete moving at a steady pace. I sped up. The footsteps sped up too. Don't look back, just get to the building. I had my keys in my hand, gripping them so tight the metal dug into my palm. The footsteps got closer. I could hear breathing now, raspy, wet breathing that didn't sound human. My building was still half a block away. I couldn't help it. I looked back. The old woman was there, about 20 feet behind me, but she wasn't walking normally. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Her head was cocked at an impossible angle, and her mouth was open too wide, showing teeth that looked sharp and wrong. I ran. Pure terror gave me speed I didn't know I had. Behind me, the footsteps changed, no longer the sound of shoes, but something scratching and clicking on the pavement. I reached my building's front door, fumbled with the keys, dropped them, snatched them up with shaking hands, got the door open and slammed it behind me. Through the glass, I saw the street was empty. The elevator was too risky. I'd be trapped if it broke down. I took the stairs 2 at a time up to the 4th floor, my legs burning, breath coming in gasps. Made it to my apartment, got inside, locked the door, threw the deadbolt, put the chain on. I stood there in my dark living room trying to catch my breath, listening. Nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Okay. I was safe now. I was inside. Whatever I thought I'd seen, it couldn't get in here. I turned on all the lights and checked every room, every closet. Empty, normal. Fine. I took a hot shower, trying to wash away the fear with the sweat and grime from work. The water helped calm me down. By the time I got out, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Sleep deprivation could do weird things to your mind, right? I made myself a sandwich, ate it standing at the kitchen counter while scrolling through my phone. The mundane activity helped ground me in reality. It was almost 1 a.m. now. Time for bed. That's when the scratching started. It came from the living room window, a light scraping sound like fingernails on glass. I froze, the half-eaten sandwich falling from my hand. The scratching moved to the next window, then the next, making its way around the apartment. Whatever was making the sound was outside, 4 stories up. I crept to the living room, keeping close to the wall. The scratching had moved to the bedroom windows now. I peered around the corner, through the doorway. The old woman's face was pressed against my bedroom window, but it wasn't really a face anymore. The skin had split open in places, revealing something dark and chitinous underneath. Her mouth had stretched impossibly wide, filled with rows of needle-like teeth. The eyes were huge black orbs that reflected the streetlight like an insect's. As I watched, paralyzed, her arms elongated, fingers stretching into foot-long claws that scraped against the glass. The dress tore as her body contorted and swelled, becoming something that was neither human nor animal. I backed away, moving as quietly as I could. The thing at the window made a sound, a high-pitched keening that made my teeth ache. I heard glass cracking. That's how I ended up here, crouched in my bedroom closet with my phone. I can hear it moving around the apartment now. The window glass crunches under its feet. Something wet drips onto the floor. That keening sound comes and goes, sometimes right outside the closet door. I've called 911 3 times. The first 2 times the line was dead. The third time, someone answered, but all I could hear was that same raspy breathing I'd heard on the street. My phone battery is at 12%. The thing hasn't found me yet, but it's getting closer. It keeps making these clicking sounds like it's tasting the air. The closet door isn't very sturdy. It won't hold if it finds me. I can hear it right outside now. The clicking is louder. Something scrapes against the door. The handle starts to turn. My phone is almost dead. If anyone finds this, stay off the late-night buses. Don't make my mistake. And if you see an old woman sitting alone at the back staring at you with unblinking eyes, get off at the next stop. Run. Run as fast as you can. The door is opening. I can smell it now, like rotting meat and wet earth. My phone is at 1%. I hear that high-pitched sound again right in front of me. I look up. The darkness is full of teeth. I never should have moved to this place. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in my kitchen with my shotgun across my lap, watching the tree line through my window. 3 days have passed since I last slept more than an hour at a time. The coffee's not helping anymore. My hands shake when I lift the mug to my lips, but I need to tell this story while I still can, while I still remember every detail, while I'm still here. It started 6 months ago when I bought this old farmhouse in western Montana. 10 acres of land, mostly wooded, with a vegetable garden out back. The previous owner died, and his kids wanted to sell fast. The price was right, and I needed to get away from city life after my divorce. I thought I'd found the perfect escape. The first 2 months were quiet. I fixed up the house, planted some tomatoes and cucumbers, got to know my nearest neighbor, Jim, who lives 2 miles down the dirt road. I settled into a routine. Wake up at dawn, tend to the garden, work on my laptop, I do freelance web development, and spend evenings on the porch watching the sunset. Then I started noticing things. Small things at first. The garden fence had deep scratches one morning. Not like from a deer or bear. I'd seen those before. These were different. They ran in parallel sets about 4 inches apart and cut nearly a 1/4 inch into the wood. I found them on the west side of the fence, facing the densest part of the woods. A week later, I spotted the first tracks. They were pressed deep into the mud near my garden after a rainstorm. Too big for a wolf or mountain lion. The prints were almost human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, spread wide apart. Each print was nearly 16 inches long. I took photos and showed them to Jim. He got real quiet, then told me to make sure I locked my doors at night. When I pressed him for more information, he just shook his head and said some places have histories better left alone. The tracks kept appearing, sometimes near the garden, sometimes by my truck, sometimes right under my bedroom window. I installed motion sensor lights and cameras, but they never caught anything. Whatever left those prints knew how to stay in the shadows. Then came the sounds at night. Not the normal hoots and howls of the forest. These were different, like someone trying to speak underwater, gurgling and choking. They started far off in the woods, but each night they got closer. I barely slept. Every noise had me reaching for the baseball bat I kept by my bed. I started carrying my grandfather's old 12-gauge whenever I went outside. The locals at the general store stopped making jokes about me being a city boy when they saw the dark circles under my eyes. 3 nights ago, everything changed. I was sitting on my porch, shotgun across my knees, watching the tree line like I'd done every night that week. The motion lights kept flickering on and off, but I never saw what triggered them. The moon was full, casting long shadows across my yard. Then I heard it. A scream that started human but twisted into something else. Something that made my bones feel like ice. It came from the big oak tree at the edge of my property, about 50 yards from the porch. I raised my shotgun and clicked on the tactical flashlight I'd mounted to it. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the tree's trunk. At first I saw nothing. Then something moved. A figure stepped out from behind the oak. It was tall, at least 8 feet. Its arms hung down past its knees, ending in long fingers with what looked like claws. The skin was a pale gray color that seemed to absorb my flashlight's beam. But its eyes, God, its eyes, they reflected the light like a cat's, glowing yellow-green in the darkness. It just stood there, staring at me. I could hear it breathing, wet, raspy sounds that reminded me of the noises I'd been hearing in the woods. My finger tightened on the trigger, but I couldn't move. Couldn't even blink. The thing's head tilted to one side, like a curious dog. Then its mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. It wasn't smiling. It was showing me what it could do. I don't remember pulling the trigger. The shotgun's roar broke whatever spell had frozen me in place. The thing jerked backward as the buckshot hit it, but it didn't fall. Instead, it made that horrible screaming sound again and darted behind the tree. I fired another shot at the tree trunk, then another. When I finally lowered the smoking gun, the yard was silent except for the ringing in my ears. I spent the rest of the night in my truck, engine running, high beams pointed at the tree. When dawn came, I searched the area. I found more tracks, deeper than before, and dark stains on the oak's bark that didn't look like blood. They smelled like copper and rot. That was 3 days ago. Each night since then, it's come closer to the house. Last night, it reached my porch. I heard its claws scraping against the door, testing the locks. The motion lights kept shorting out, plunging me into darkness for seconds at a time. I've called the sheriff, but they think I'm just another city person spooked by wildlife. Jim won't answer his phone. I tried to leave yesterday morning, but my truck wouldn't start. Something had torn out parts of the engine. The cuts in the metal matched the scratches on my fence. So now I sit here in my kitchen watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The coffee's cold. My shotgun has 5 shells left. I've pushed the refrigerator in front of the back door and nailed boards across the windows, but I know it won't be enough. The thing is learning, testing. Each night it stays longer, gets braver. It wants me to know it's coming, wants me to feel the fear build until I can't think straight. The sun's almost gone now. Through my window, I can see the oak tree where I first spotted it. Something's different about the trunk. There are claw marks running up its length, fresh ones that weren't there this morning. They form a pattern, 3 vertical lines crossed by 2 horizontal ones. It's counting down. My hands have stopped shaking. The fear is still there, but it's hardened into something else. Determination, maybe, or resignation. I've loaded my last shells into the shotgun. The motion lights just clicked on outside. I can hear breathing at my window. I shouldn't have gone up those stairs. That's what everyone says after something goes wrong, right? But standing here now, with my heart threatening to burst through my chest, I know it's true. I should have stayed down there with Jake and Maria, making stupid jokes about ghost stories and drinking our cheap beer. Instead, I'm trapped in this lighthouse keeper's room, listening to footsteps that shouldn't exist, trying to convince myself that what I saw in the beam of my flashlight was just a trick of light and shadow. But I should start at the beginning. My name's David Mitchell, and 48 hours ago, I was just a normal guy planning a weekend trip with friends to explore an abandoned lighthouse on the Oregon coast. Now, I'm not sure I'll ever sleep properly again. It started as Jake's idea. He'd found the old Cascade Head lighthouse while researching locations for his photography blog. According to his research, it had been abandoned since 1987 after being replaced by an automated beacon system. The state had planned to turn it into a historical site, but budget cuts killed that idea. Now it just sits there, slowly decaying, 40 miles from the nearest town. It'll be perfect, Jake had said, showing us photos on his phone. No security, no tourists, just pure urban exploration gold. Maria, his girlfriend, was immediately on board. She's always up for anything that might make a good Instagram story. I took more convincing, but eventually agreed. What else was I going to do on a Saturday night? We drove out yesterday afternoon, timing it so we'd arrive just before sunset. The lighthouse stands on a rocky peninsula, connected to the mainland by a narrow strip of land that's almost completely submerged during high tide. Jake had checked the tide tables. We had a 6-hour window before the path would be underwater again. The drive took longer than expected. The last 5 miles were on an unpaved road that hadn't seen maintenance in years. By the time we parked Jake's Subaru in a hidden spot behind some trees, the sun was already touching the horizon. "We should wait until dark anyway," Maria said, pulling her black beanie lower against the cold wind. "It'll be more atmospheric." I remember looking up at the lighthouse then. It was taller than it had looked in the photos, maybe 120 feet high, built from weathered gray stone that had turned almost black on the windward side. Even in the dying light, I could see patches where the mortar had crumbled away between the blocks. The windows were all boarded up except for the lantern room at the top, where broken glass caught the last rays of sunlight. We killed time eating sandwiches and planning our approach. Jake had brought real exploration gear, powerful flashlights, gloves, dust masks, even a basic first aid kit. Maria had her usual vlogging setup, a mirrorless camera with a stabilizer and a bunch of small LED lights. I felt underprepared with just my phone and the small flashlight from my car's emergency kit. It was fully dark when we finally approached the lighthouse. The moon wasn't up yet, and clouds covered most of the stars. Our flashlight beams bounced off the wet rocks as we picked our way along the path. The waves crashed against the base of the peninsula, sending spray high enough that I could taste salt on my lips. The entrance was easier than we expected. Someone had already pried the boards off the door, leaving just enough space to squeeze through. The wood was wet and rotting, and my jacket caught a splinter as I followed Jake and Maria inside. The ground floor was one large room, probably once used for storage. Our flashlights revealed piles of rusted metal drums, rotting wooden crates, and thick cobwebs everywhere. The air smelled of mold and salt, with an underlying metallic tang that made me think of old blood. I didn't share that observation with the others. "Check this out," Jake said, his flashlight beam illuminating a steep spiral staircase in the center of the room. It was made of cast iron, and although spots of rust showed through the old paint, it looked solid enough. "This goes all the way to the top." Maria was already recording, her camera's light adding to the jumble of shadows. "This is amazing," she whispered, panning across the room. "The atmosphere is perfect." We started up the stairs, Jake leading the way. The metal steps rang hollow under our feet, the sound echoing up the tower. I counted the landings as we passed them. 1, 2, 3. Each floor had a door leading to what I assumed were living quarters or storage rooms, but we didn't stop to explore. Jake was focused on reaching the top, where the actual light mechanism would be. It was on the 5th landing that I first noticed something wrong. While Jake and Maria examined a rusted door handle, I looked up through the center of the spiral staircase. Far above, where the stairs ended at the lantern room, I saw a flash of light. "Hey," I said, "did you see that?" "See what?" Maria was still filming the door. "I thought I saw a light up top." Jake shone his flashlight up the stairwell. "Probably just moonlight through the broken windows." "Moon's not up yet," I said, but they were already starting up the next flight of stairs. We climbed 2 more floors before I saw it again. This time I was sure. A definite flash of light from the lantern room, like someone briefly turning on a flashlight. I stopped climbing. "Guys, I seriously saw something up there." Jake turned back, his flashlight beam catching me in the face. "Could be other explorers," he said, "or maybe some local kids." "We didn't see any other cars," I pointed out. "They could have parked somewhere else. Come on, we're almost there." I followed them up another flight, but my enthusiasm had evaporated. The metallic smell was stronger here, and the air felt colder. When we reached the 8th landing, I heard something that made me grab Jake's arm. "Listen," I whispered. We all stood perfectly still. For several seconds, there was nothing but the distant sound of waves and the creak of metal cooling in the night air. Then we heard it. Clear footsteps on the metal stairs above us. Maria switched off her camera. Jake's flashlight beam darted up the stairwell but showed only empty steps disappearing into darkness. "Hello?" Jake called out. His voice echoed up the tower. No response. "Maybe we should go back." Maria said, but Jake was already heading up the next flight of stairs. I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't let them go up there alone. The footsteps had stopped. We climbed the last 2 flights in tense silence, our flashlight beams jumping at every shadow. Finally, we reached the top landing. A heavy metal door stood between us and the lantern room. "It's probably locked," Maria said hopefully. Jake tried the handle. It turned with a screech of rusty metal, and the door swung open. The lantern room was a circular space about 15 feet across. The walls were mostly glass, much of it broken, letting in the cold night air. In the center stood the remains of the lighting mechanism, a massive lens assembly mounted on a rusted pedestal. Our flashlights played across prisms and mirrors, creating dancing patterns of light and shadow. "This is incredible," Jake said, moving closer to examine the lens. Maria followed him, her camera running again. I stayed by the door, scanning the room. Something felt wrong. The footsteps we'd heard had to come from somewhere, but the room was empty except for us. And that light I'd seen, that's when I remembered my original purpose for coming up here. "Guys, I'm going to check something," I said, heading for the small door that led to the exterior gallery, a narrow walkway that ran around the outside of the lantern room. "Be careful," Maria called after me. "The railing might be rusty." The gallery door wasn't locked. I stepped out into the night air, gripping the railing despite Maria's warning. From here I could see for miles, the dark mass of the forest behind us, the endless black expanse of the Pacific ahead. The wind was stronger up here, making the whole structure sway slightly. I walked slowly around the gallery, testing each step before putting my full weight down. When I reached the far side, I stopped. Something was scratched into the metal wall of the lighthouse. Not graffiti, but a series of vertical marks like someone keeping count of days. Below them was a date. November 15th, 1987. The day the lighthouse was officially decommissioned. I was still examining the marks when I heard the gallery door close behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The door was shut, and through the glass walls of the lantern room I could see that Jake and Maria were gone. "Very funny, guys," I called out, but the wind snatched my words away. I hurried back to the door and tried the handle. It didn't move. My first thought was that the wind had blown it shut, but when I pulled harder I realized it wasn't just stuck. It was locked. Through the glass I could see that the internal bolt had been slid into place. "Jake? Maria?" I pounded on the door. No response. My flashlight beam showed an empty room. That's when I heard the footsteps again, this time inside the lantern room. Slow, deliberate steps on the metal floor, moving in a circle around the central lens. But I couldn't see anyone making them. I pressed against the glass, trying to see better. The footsteps completed their circle and stopped. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then I heard a new sound, the creak of rusted hinges as the door to the spiral staircase slowly swung closed. The sound of the latch catching echoed in the empty room. I was now completely locked out, standing on a narrow metal platform 120 feet above the rocks, with something unseen inside the lighthouse. My phone was in my jacket pocket. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. No signal. Of course not. We were miles from the nearest cell tower. I tried anyway, punching in Jake's number. Nothing. The footsteps started again, but this time they were on the stairs, heading down. I pressed my ear against the glass and heard Jake's voice from somewhere below, calling my name. "I'm up here," I shouted. "The door's locked." More footsteps, running up the stairs now. Jake appeared in the lantern room alone, his flashlight beam wild and erratic. "David, where are you?" "Out here, on the gallery." He spun toward my voice and ran to the door. The bolt slid back and suddenly I was back inside, gasping in relief. "Where's Maria?" I asked. "Down on the 7th floor. She thought she heard someone calling her name." Jake's face was pale in the flashlight beam. "What happened? How did you get locked out there?" "I don't know. The door just closed behind me. Where did you guys go?" "We didn't go anywhere. We were right here the whole time." We stared at each other as the implications of that sank in. Then we heard Maria scream. The sound came from far below, echoing up the stairwell. Without a word, we both ran for the door. It was still locked. Jake rattled the handle frantically. "This was open a second ago." I added my strength to his, but the door wouldn't budge. Maria screamed again, closer this time, followed by the sound of running footsteps on the stairs. "Maria!" Jake shouted. "We're locked in! Get help!" The footsteps reached our landing. We heard someone breathing heavily just outside the door. Then Maria's voice, strange and flat. "The door's locked." "We know." Jake was still fighting with the handle. "Can you open it from your side?" "The door's locked," Maria's voice repeated, exactly the same way. Then again. "The door's locked." Jake stopped pulling on the handle. We both stepped back from the door. "Maria?" he called, his voice shaking. "The door's locked. The door's locked. The door's locked." The words ran together, getting faster and faster, the voice less and less like Maria's with each repetition. Then it stopped. For several seconds, there was only silence. Jake raised his flashlight, aiming it through the small window in the door. The beam illuminated an empty landing. "Oh, God," Jake whispered. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God." I grabbed his arm. "Listen." From below came the sound of footsteps, not on the metal stairs this time, but on stone, moving across one of the lower floors. Then another set of footsteps joined them, and another, and another. They were all heading up. Jake and I backed away from the door until we hit the central lens assembly. Our flashlight beams danced wildly around the room as we tried to cover all angles at once. The footsteps grew louder, closer, filling the stairwell with their echoes until it sounded like an army was climbing toward us. Then, suddenly, they stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to have died away. We stood there, barely breathing, our flashlights trained on the door. A single footstep broke the silence, on the landing right outside. The door handle began to turn. Jake's flashlight flickered and went out. Mine followed a second later, plunging us into complete darkness. In that moment of blindness, I heard the door open. What happened next is still confused in my mind. I remember a rush of cold air, the smell of salt and rot growing overwhelming. Jake screamed, a sound cut off mid-breath. Something brushed past me in the darkness, something cold and wet that left my skin crawling. I dropped to the floor, crawling blindly until I found the wall. My flashlight had rolled away somewhere, but my phone was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, using its dim screen for light. The lantern room was empty. Jake was gone. The door stood open, revealing the dark stairwell beyond. From below came the sound of Maria's voice, then Jake's calling my name. But their voices were wrong. Flat, mechanical, like bad recordings played back too slowly. I stayed pressed against the wall, trying to control my breathing. The voices continued calling, moving around the lower floors of the lighthouse. Occasionally I heard footsteps on the stairs, but they never came all the way up again. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, probably. I watched the battery indicator on my phone slowly drain away. When it hit 10%, I finally made myself move. The stairwell was pitch black. I used my phone's screen to light each step as I descended, trying to move as quietly as possible. The voices had stopped, but I could still hear footsteps, always just a few floors away, never getting closer or farther. I counted the landings as I passed them. 8, 7, 6. On the 5th floor, my phone died. I continued in total darkness, one hand on the wall, feeling my way down step by step. I was on the 3rd landing when I heard it, a click and a hum from far above. A light began to sweep through the stairwell, rotating regularly just as the lighthouse beacon must have done decades ago. But this light was wrong. It was too blue, too cold, and where it touched the walls, the metal seemed to writhe and twist. I ran. I missed steps, slipped, caught myself on the railing. Behind me, the light continued to revolve, sweeping down the stairwell like a searchlight. I could hear footsteps above, matching my pace. I hit the ground floor at full speed, nearly crashing into the wall. The entrance was just visible as a slightly lighter rectangle in the darkness. I ran for it, squeezing through the gap in the boards without slowing down. The light from above caught me just as I cleared the doorway. For a split second, I felt an intense cold, and something tried to grab my jacket. Then I was through, running across the wet rocks toward where we'd parked the car. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. A truck driver found me there just after dawn, walked 5 miles in the rain. He didn't believe my story about the lighthouse, but he gave me a ride to the nearest town. The police didn't believe me either. They searched the lighthouse but found nothing. No sign of Jake or Maria. No evidence anyone had been there at all. Jake's car was gone from where we'd parked it, though I know we left it there. I've tried calling Jake and Maria's phones every day since then. They always go straight to voicemail. Their social media accounts haven't been updated. Their families have filed missing persons reports. Sometimes late at night, my phone rings. When I answer, I hear footsteps on metal stairs and voices calling my name. The voices sound almost like Jake and Maria, but not quite. And sometimes in the background, I hear something else. The click and hum of a light beginning to turn. I've told the police everything, but they're starting to look at me differently now. They keep asking about my relationship with Jake and Maria, about where I was between the time they disappeared and when the truck driver found me. I know how it sounds. I know what they think happened, but I also know what I saw, what I heard in that lighthouse. And I know that somewhere, somehow, Jake. The first time I heard my name, I thought it was just the wind. 3 seconds later, I knew I was wrong. I was walking home from the train station at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. The rain had started 20 minutes earlier, soaking through my jacket and running down my neck. My shoes squeaked against the wet sidewalk of Pine Street, and water dripped from the brim of my baseball cap. The streetlights cast orange circles on the ground, but the spaces between them were pitch black. That's when it happened. Michael. The voice wasn't loud. It was barely above a whisper, but I heard it clearly over the steady drumming of the rain. I stopped walking and turned around. The street behind me was empty, just puddles reflecting the streetlights and parked cars with water streaming down their windows. I shook my head and kept walking. My socks were wet, and I just wanted to get home. Michael. This time the voice came from my left. I jerked my head toward it. Nothing there except the brick wall of the old hardware store, its security gate pulled down and locked. My heart started beating faster. "It's just the rain," I said out loud. My voice sounded strange and small in the empty street. I picked up my pace, water splashing around my feet. Home was 6 blocks away, just 6 blocks. Michael. Right behind me now. I spun around so fast I almost slipped. My breathing came in quick bursts. The street was still empty, but the voice had been right there. Right fucking there. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, accidentally smearing water across the screen. 11:51 p.m. No new messages, no missed calls. 4 bars of signal. Michael. Left side again, close. I pressed my back against the wall of the hardware store. My chest felt tight. I dialed 911 but didn't hit send yet. What would I even tell them? That I was hearing voices in the rain? Michael. We're from the right this time. I pushed off from the wall and started running. Water splashed up my legs. My wet clothes felt heavy and cold. Michael. Ahead of me now. I skidded to a stop, nearly falling. The voice was everywhere and nowhere. Michael. Behind. Michael. Above. Michael. Inside my head? I ran faster, splashing through puddles. My lungs burned. The phone was still in my hand. 911 ready to dial. 5 blocks to go. Michael. Louder now. Much louder. I could hear something in the voice that I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't angry or threatening. It sounded desperate. I reached the intersection of Pine and 4th Street. The traffic light blinked yellow, reflecting off the wet asphalt. I stopped at the corner, gasping for breath, water running down my face. Please. The voice was different now. still saying my name but adding something else. Begging. Please, Michael. I pressed my hands against my ears. It didn't help. The voice was just as clear. I need your help, Michael. 4 blocks to go. I could see the neon sign of the 24-hour pharmacy ahead. Maybe I could wait there until morning. Call a cab. Something. They're coming for me, Michael. I lowered my hands from my ears. Who's coming? I shouted into the rain. Who are you? Behind you. I turned around slowly. The street was still empty, but something was different. The rain, it was falling wrong. In one spot, about 10 feet away, the raindrops were moving sideways instead of down. My legs wouldn't move. I stood there, watching the impossible rain. The sideways drops formed a shape, vague at first, then clearer. A human outline. They're almost here, the voice said from the rain shape. Please. The street light above me flickered. When it came back on, I saw them. 3 figures at the end of the block. They looked like people, but they moved wrong. Too smooth, too fast. They glided over the wet sidewalk without making a sound. The rain shape grabbed my arm. I felt cold water wrap around my wrist, but it held like solid flesh. Run, it said. I ran. The rain shape ran with me, its watery hand still gripping my arm. I heard nothing behind us, but I knew they were following. The rain shape pulled me down a side street I'd never noticed before, even though I'd walked this route hundreds of times. What are they? I gasped as we ran. Collectors, the rain shape said. Its voice was clearer now, definitely male, young. They take people like me, people who died wrong. We turned another corner. The streets didn't look familiar anymore. The buildings were older, darker. No streetlights here. You died? I asked, still running. Car crash, 3 weeks ago. But something went wrong. I didn't go. They want to fix the mistake. Why me? Why can I see you? Because you were there. You called the ambulance. You held my hand until they came. The memory hit me like a punch to the chest. The rain-slicked road, the crumpled car, the young man trapped inside, barely breathing. I'd stayed with him, talked to him, told him help was coming. I never knew his name. Kevin, the rain shape said, answering my unspoken question. I'm Kevin Mitchell. We stopped running. We were in some kind of courtyard surrounded by old brick buildings. No windows, no doors. Just brick walls stretching up into the darkness. They're here, Kevin said. The 3 figures glided into the courtyard. Up close, they looked like photographs of people that had been smeared and distorted. Their faces were blank except for dark holes where eyes should be. You can't have him, I said. My voice shook, but I meant it. The figures stopped, their heads tilted in perfect unison. This one is marked for collection, they said together. Their voices sounded like radio static. The error must be corrected. He doesn't want to go, I said. Want is irrelevant. The balance must be maintained. Kevin's watery hand tightened on my arm. I'm not ready, he said. Please, I need more time. The figures moved closer. Time is not yours to take. I stepped in front of Kevin. Rain ran down my face, into my eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs. What if someone volunteers to take responsibility for him? The figures stopped again. Their eye holes seemed to grow darker. You would anchor him? They asked. You would take his burden? Yes, I said, not really understanding what I was agreeing to. The price is heavy, they said. You will see others like him. Lost ones, wrong ones. They will come to you for help. Fine, I said. You will live with 1 foot in their world. The boundary between life and death will blur for you. I understand. They were silent for a long moment. The rain fell harder. The bargain is struck, they said finally. Their forms began to fade. He is your responsibility now. Do not make us return. Then they were gone. Kevin's hand let go of my arm. I turned to look at him. His rain shape was more solid now, more human. I could almost see his face. "Thank you," he said. "What happens now?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "But I think I can find my way from here, and others will come to you. Lost ones, like they said. You'll help them too. How will I know what to do?" "You'll learn." His form was starting to disperse, becoming one with the rain again. "You helped me, even before you knew who I was. That's why they let you make the bargain. You already had it in you." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the strange courtyard. The rain was letting up. It took me an hour to find my way home. The streets had returned to normal, but they looked different to me now. I noticed things I'd never seen before. Shadows that moved wrong, patches of air that bent the light, places where the boundary between worlds was thin. I unlocked my front door at 1:23 a.m. My clothes were soaked and I was shivering. But as I stepped inside, I heard it. Far away, barely audible. Someone calling my name. I took off my wet jacket and hung it up. Changed into dry clothes, made a cup of coffee. Then I went back out into the night. Someone needed help finding their way home. The rain started falling again as I walked down the street. But this time, I wasn't afraid of the voices in it. This time, I was listening for them. This was my job now, my responsibility. And somewhere in the rain, someone was calling my name. I shouldn't have bought that mirror. That's what I keep telling myself as I sit here in the dark watching it from across the room. My hands are shaking as I type this on my phone. I need to get this down, to tell someone what's happening. Maybe then they'll understand if something happens to me. 3 weeks ago, I stopped at Randy's Antiques and Oddities, one of those junk shops that pop up in strip malls. I had just moved into my new apartment and needed some cheap furniture. The place smelled like old books and furniture polish. Dust floated in the sunlight coming through the grimy windows. The mirror stood in the back corner. 7 feet tall, dark wood frame, carved with simple geometric patterns. The glass had that slight waviness you see in old mirrors. A yellow price tag hung from one corner, $75. "Good eye," Randy said behind me. I jumped. He was a skinny guy in his 60s wearing a Hawaiian shirt. That's from an estate sale in Providence. Original owner died in 1962. Been in storage ever since. I ran my hand over the frame. The wood felt smooth, worn by years of touching. Seems cheap for something this old. Randy shrugged. Previous buyers returned it. Said it gave them the creeps. Superstitious nonsense if you ask me. But their loss is your gain. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why multiple people returned it. But the price was right, and it would look good in my bedroom. "I'll take it," I said. Randy helped me carry it to my car. The mirror was heavy, solid oak frame, he said. As we tilted it to slide it into my trunk, I caught our reflection. For a split second, I thought I saw something move in the background, like a dark shape passing behind us. But when I looked over my shoulder, the parking lot was empty. Getting it up to my third-floor apartment was a nightmare. I had to pay the building maintenance guy $40 to help. We positioned it in the corner of my bedroom, angled so I could see myself while getting dressed. The first few days were normal. The mirror did its job, reflected me, the room, nothing unusual. Then I started noticing things in my peripheral vision. Small movements like someone walking past quickly. But when I turned to look directly, nothing was there. I blamed it on being alone in a new place. The mind plays tricks when you're getting used to new surroundings. But the movements got more frequent and closer. A week after buying the mirror, I woke up at 3 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. As I walked past the mirror, I saw it clearly. A human-shaped shadow standing in the reflected version of my room, maybe 6 feet back from the glass. I froze. The shadow was darker than the darkness around it. like a hole cut in reality. It didn't move. Neither did I. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Sweat ran down my back. I forced myself to turn and look at the actual room behind me. Empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Kept the lights on and sat in my living room until sunrise. Told myself I was being stupid, that I was half asleep and seeing things. But I knew what I saw. The next night, the shadow was closer to the glass, maybe 4 feet back. I only caught glimpses. Never could look at it directly in the mirror. Like trying to see a star by looking slightly away from it. But it was there, waiting. I started covering the mirror with a sheet before bed. But every morning the sheet was on the floor. I used duct tape. The tape peeled off overnight. Tried pushing the mirror face first against the wall. By morning it had rotated back around. The shadow kept getting closer. 3 feet from the glass, then 2. Close enough now that I could make out more details. It was roughly my height and build, but its edges were fuzzy like smoke underwater. No features I could see, just absolute darkness in a human shape. Last night, it stood right at the glass. I lay in bed, paralyzed with fear, watching it in the mirror. My breath came in short gasps. My sheets were soaked with sweat. The shadow raised what might have been an arm and pressed it against its side of the glass. The surface rippled like water. I ran. Spent the night in my car in a Walmart parking lot. Came back this morning planning to get rid of the mirror. But when I opened my bedroom door, I knew something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy, and cold. I could see my breath. The shadow wasn't in the mirror anymore. It stood in my actual room between me and the glass. Solid darkness, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in the world. It turned toward me. Where its face should be, there was only void. I slammed the door and ran. Now I'm sitting in my car again, watching the sunset. I can see my bedroom window from here. Something dark keeps passing by it. I tried calling Randy's shop to ask about the mirror's history. The number's disconnected. I drove by earlier. The store is empty. Looks like it's been closed for months. The battery on my phone is almost dead. I need to go back up there, try to deal with this. The shadow came through. It's in our world now. And somehow I know it's not done. It wants something else. Wants to trade places, maybe. Put me on the other side of the glass. I'm going up there now. Have to face it. If anyone finds this, stay away from old mirrors. Don't buy them. Don't look in them. Especially if they're too cheap to be true. Sometimes there's a good reason no one wants them. The sun just set. I can see a shadow moving in my bedroom window again. It's pressed against the glass, looking down at me. I think it's smiling. My hands won't stop shaking. The shadow is waving now, beckoning me to come up. And God help me, I think I'm going to. Need to know what's on the other side. Need to know why it chose me. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. Check the mirror in my bedroom. If you see someone trapped on the other side, banging on the glass, trying to get out, that's me. Don't let me out. Whatever I say, whatever I promise, whatever I beg, leave me there. Because it won't really be me anymore. I'm walking up the stairs now. The shadow is waiting. I can feel it calling me. Goodbye.